Hello, everyone, and welcome back to every episode of Phineas and Ferb Reviewed. We are down to one final season of this amazing show, Season 4. Hard to believe we've already gotten through the first 3 seasons. And just to refresh your memory, here's a reminder of how those seasons performed. Keep in mind that I don't expect anything less for Season 4, although I do expect that this season will be my most controversial and interesting review to date. Aside from, the elephant in the room, we have 6 total hour-long specials and 49 total episodes to review for Season 4. Needless to say, I expect it to be a doozy. So in the interest of saving time, let's jump right into it. I'm also going to try to keep my reviews shorter this time around to save some time, although I don't expect that to work out swimmingly. But whatever. Okay, everybody ready? Let's go. Episode 401A. Fly on the Wall. Candace is apparently turned into a fly. Doofenshmirtz fights his evil scientist's block. I really enjoy this episode, and I think it's a great way to open up the season. So Candace accidentally gets turned into a fly, and most of her plot is basically just her flying around, trying to make her way back home while also trying to bust the boys, while also trying to get ready for a dinner date with Jeremy. Oh, and I absolutely love the twist ending, where Candace thinks he's taking her to an actual rodeo, but then it turns out he's just taking her to a restaurant that is cleverly called the Rodeo. Even better is that apparently they have a cowboy special on Tuesdays. I absolutely love that bit. Oh, and I really like that it was Buford who inadvertently interferes with the big idea and causes Candace to turn into a fly. See, it works better here than in Where's Perry because, well, obviously a big idea with multiple working parts is a lot more complex to understand than how to operate a simple vine. As for Doof's plot, yeah, it's pretty enjoyable too. He has a mental block and he enlists Perry to help him beat it. I love the montage of exercises they show with them too. And when they come out of it, Doof has built an Inator without a self-destruct button a la Across the Second Dimension, only for the Phineas and Ferb big idea, a giant mechanical tire swing, to come around and destroy it right on the spot, which is utterly hilarious. So overall, the episode is pretty good. I give it 4 stars. Oh, and I didn't even mention Phineas and Ferb's big idea. I like it. Like I said, it's just a giant mechanical tire swing, but they do throw in a reference to Across the Second Dimension, and it's mechanical, so all's forgiven, I guess. I do think the Doof plot is what pulls this into 4 stars, because it's just so funny, and the ending is fantastic. Episode 401B, My Sweet Ride. Phineas and Ferb build Candace a new car to enter the Danville doo-wop hop. Doofenshmirtz plots to rust all of the other cars. I really like the 50s-esque vibe this episode gives off. It's a nice change of pace of sorts. So Lawrence tries to work on a car to give to Candace, but he gets lost in the fray after a mishap, so Phineas and Ferb opt to build their own car to give to her so she and Jeremy can go to the doo-wop hop. What I like the most about this episode is the fact that it really seems like there's a great camaraderie between all of these characters, which is wonderful to see in a show. I even like the musical number in this episode. Like, a lot. Although, I will say this. For some reason, Candace's singing seems off in this song. I don't exactly know why. Maybe Ashley Tisdale's voice just isn't right for this genre of music. Whatever it is, it's a small gripe, I admit. As for the Doof plot, yeah, I really like this one. So he restores an old car from his childhood in order to honor his uncle and enter this car into the doo-wop hop, while also plotting to rust the other cars in the competition so he can win. I really liked the entomology joke. By the way, the word he was looking for was etymology, just so you know. Oh, and we actually get to see Carl learn about Vanessa and Monty's secret relationship. So, that's good. It's one of the few times we actually get to see the intended idea for this relationship play out. Which is kind of sad when you think about it. I still wish they had done more with this idea. Overall, I really like this episode, and it gets 4 stars. The last scene where Candace gives Phineas and Ferb the trophy really does make me gush. It's just nice. 402A. For your ice only. Phineas and Ferb create Hockey Z9. Doofenshmirtz plots to turn himself into an abominable snowman. This episode is good. Just good. To be honest, I unfairly tend to compare it and its sister episode to Phineas and Ferb Christmas Vacation, and yet I know that this episode is not going to be nearly as good as that special. There are some things I like in this episode though. My favorite scene was the one where Candace tries to talk hockey, and she looks like a complete dingus while doing so. I even like that they brought back Isabella's bit from It's a Mud, 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 Mud World, where she talks in an extremely masculine and deep voice to promote something. I even like the Hockey Z9 song. What I don't like very much is the entirely new winter theme song they wrote for this episode. Yeah, they decided to do a completely new one, rather than just use the one from Christmas Vacation. It's not bad, and I don't hate it, it's just not clicking for me. The Phineas and Ferb stuff is perfectly fine. It's basically a similar plot to My Fair Goalie, only with hockey instead of soccer. It's nothing special, but it's okay. Although, unfortunately, unlike My Fair Goalie, this one is only 11 minutes long, so there's not really that much time to see any action. Doof's plot is kind of the same deal. It's okay, and the fight scene is pretty cool, but it doesn't entice me the way past plots have enticed me. But like I said, nothing about either plot is bad. There are some good and genuinely funny moments, and I'm glad I saw this one. Oh, and apparently this episode establishes that Stacy and Ginger are sisters. Okay, that's cool. Overall, I give this episode 3 stars. It's certainly a much better holiday special than A Phineas and Ferb Family Christmas, and I can definitely say that about the sister episode too, but I was expecting a bit more from this episode, and I was a tad bit disappointed. 402B. Happy New Year! Phineas and Ferb build their own New Year's Eve ball. Candace attempts to make a no-busting New Year's resolution. Doofenshmirtz plots to make everyone obey him as their New Year's resolution. While I won't tout this episode as must-see material, or even some of my favorite material from the show, I enjoyed this episode a lot more than I expected to. The Phineas and Ferb stuff is pretty standard. They build their own New Year's ball to drop. I do like the design of the ball, though. I thought it was pretty cool. And I especially liked the part with Phineas trolling Isabella at the beginning when she mentions the tradition of New Year's kisses. And yes, I am convinced he was trolling her. And the musical number at the end was pretty nice, too. Doofenshmirtz's plot is really funny, so he wants to hypnotize everyone into making their resolution obeying him as leader. It sounds really stupid on paper, but then I actually saw it play out, and it was kind of hilarious. What makes it even better is that he actually succeeds. Yeah, Perry doesn't stop him in any way, shape, or form. He succeeds and hypnotizes everyone at the party until they all completely waffle on obeying him because, in their own words, nobody follows their own New Year's resolution. Yeah, see, I can understand if some people find that to be a lazy cop-out to the end of the plot because, yeah, it could come off as a lazy cop-out. Me personally, though, I found it hilarious, in a way, because it's true. Really, I can't tell you how many New Year's resolutions I've made in my lifetime that I've abandoned in, the first month, the first week, heck, the first day. So seeing it here as both a joke and a plot point, it made me feel better about it. The Candace plot is probably the weakest of the three, but to its credit, it's still pretty enjoyable. The idea of her deciding to try quitting busting her brothers is an idea we've already seen in Last Train to Bustville, but instead of it being a stupid misunderstanding on her part that motivates her, it's the idea of New Year's resolutions that motivates her, which is honestly kind of clever. Of course, she fails, and when all's said and done, she tries and fails one more time to bust them before she ultimately gives up at the end and has a nice moment with Jeremy. My favorite part of this plot was honestly when she ran into this woman who had the exact same busting mentality as her, and then she just asks her to adopt her. That was hilarious. And the ending where she and Jeremy kiss is really sweet. Honestly, this episode is just great. It's not Christmas Vacation levels of great, but it's pretty enjoyable. So, I give it 4 stars. I know the show is focused around summer vacation, but episodes like this make me wish they had done more outside of summer, like in other holidays, or even in school, because they've shown they have the ability to do good work in other seasons and other time periods. 403A. Bully Bust. Candace enlists Buford's assistance to bust Phineas and Ferb. Doofenshmirtz suffers from a caffeine overload. So I've made it clear that I'm not the biggest fan of plots that revolve around Candace busting on the boys, but this one I actually do like. See, the focus isn't on Candace, per se, because she doesn't have too much of a role in this episode. She basically serves to just bark orders at Buford and then be dumbfounded when at the end, shock of all shocks, she fails. The rest is just Buford trying to keep the big idea from going anywhere before Linda returns home. And I actually find it funny, the things he does, like locking the big idea to the ground, throwing random objects in the air so the big idea isn't hit by a green ray of death. Although of all the kids Candace had to pick from, I'm surprised she chose Buford. I would have guessed Isabella. A lot of the gags here are just really funny. Like, I like Buford's various musical attempts to explain his lifestyle and his way of thinking, especially the last one that basically amounts to him saying, if at first you don't succeed, just give up. I like Isabella fawning over Phineas using big words to explain the art of brushing your teeth and washing up, and then chastising Baljeet when he tries to do the same. I even sort of like that Buford has this sort of cynical attitude towards Candace, especially when she interrupts his musical numbers. It's actually really funny. And I guess the tough shoelaces jokes were amusing enough. This plot alone is really fun to watch, and I keep coming back to it repeatedly. Unfortunately, I can't say the same for the Doof plot. It's meh. Okay, so they set it up so Doof traps Perry in a cage inspired by a board game, yet surprisingly no Skiddly Whiffers reference. They try to set it up that it was a game from his childhood that he wasn't allowed to play, and they try to incorporate it into the fight scene, but it doesn't really click that well, and neither does Doof being hopped up on energy from too much caffeine. As far as his evil plan goes, he's created a laser that can send things and people into orbit, and there's nothing really to it. I could forgive the simple plot and the disoriented nature of it if the jokes were funny, but honestly, here they just aren't. With that said, I think the Buford stuff is strong enough and funny enough to make me comfortable in giving this episode 4 stars. It's just a shame that the Doof plot was so unfocused and incoherent. Also, that Candace quote over there, absolutely hilarious both in and out of context. 403B, Backyard Hodgepodge. Phineas and Ferb recycle their old projects into a brand new one. Doofenshmirtz strikes back after one of his Inators is used for good. I think I finally figured out why I was sort of turned off by the tie-in promotions Disney did for Da Plane, and Candace's Big Day. It was because those episodes were, at least from what I could tell, more or less done as a specific tie-in to whatever Disney wanted to promote, whether it was recycling, or going green, or healthy lifestyles, etc. From what I can gather, there's no such promotions for this episode. The idea of recycling is mostly subtle for this episode, and it allows for the story to stand on its own legs. And for what it is, it holds up pretty well. Granted, most of their plot is just the musical montage of the kids building the recycled big idea, as well as it being showcased for parts of the second half, but that's just standard stuff. The Doofenshmirtz plot, and what I guess you could call the Linda plot, are what really stand out. Doof wants revenge after he finds out that one of his inventions has been used for good, resulting in royalty checks for him. He creates the eye fog Inator to get back at them. He uses it on Perry to trap him, and then Perry tricks him into using it on himself, resulting in, honestly, one of the funniest fight scenes I've seen in quite some time. It's even better when the Inator is used at the end of the episode, but I'll get to that in a bit. So, Linda's plot, yeah, it's actually pretty funny here. She's been up all night baking pies for a charity event, and the lack of sleep has made her go a little cuckoo. She hallucinates and burns a bunch of pies, and then at the end, she actually gets to see the big idea in motion. Yeah, she actually sees it. But she thinks she's finally snapped, so when Candace comes in at the end and says she doesn't see it, because she was hit with the Inator just before that very moment, Linda finally retires to bed. It's brief, but man is it funny, especially the singing pies bit. That's funnier than it has any right to be. I enjoy this episode a lot. And while I won't quite put it in the must-see file, I think it's definitely underrated. It deserves 4 stars. Oh, and there's a very, very brief subplot involving Lawrence trying to practice for a speech. At the end, he goes in platypus grub and an arm sling. It's very brief, and honestly, the episode would have been just as good without it, but those 2 lines over there that come at the end of the episode make it almost all worth it. 404A, Der Kinderlumper. Candace is chosen to marshal the running of the chinchillas. Doofenshmirtz schemes to turn himself into an old fabled monster to scare Mayor Roger out of power. This is a really fun episode. First, the Candace stuff. I enjoy it. I don't think it's anything special, but the stuff with her and the kids running away from the enlarged chinchillas is actually really funny and really thrilling. It's an 11-minute episode, and yet this plot makes it feel like a 22-minute episode. I'm actually impressed how suspenseful they were able to make it. And yeah, I know the ending makes it clear they were never in any real danger, but until you see the episode all the way through, you don't know that, so it's kind of a heart racer. But honestly, it's the Doof plot that absolutely steals the show here. So his idea is to turn himself into an old fabled monster known as the kinderlumper, who, according to Doof, goes after misbehaving people and children. The musical number used to explain this is not only really great, but just really catchy, and I think it's one of the better songs of Season 4. And he actually goes through with transforming himself. Although, actually, now that I think about it, I find it really odd that he went through tormenting himself with his past in This Is Your Backstory in order to achieve the same result, while in this episode, it's a simple Inator that does the trick. He storms Town Hall and confronts Roger, and yeah, that fun fact is true. Perry has virtually no effect on the plot after he's captured. Doof is basically defeated by legit one of the funniest twists I've seen on the show. It turns out, according to Mayor Roger, that the kinderlumper is basically Gimmelstumpf's version of Santa Claus, and that apparently his mother only told the horrible version to Heinz in order to scare him. That's just awful. And Doof's reaction to that revelation is absolutely hilarious. I laughed so much. And obviously it's Doof's Inator that hits the chinchillas and turns them gargantuan and scares everybody, but of course at the end the effects all wear off and everybody goes back to normal. And that's pretty much the episode. It's all around really good, really funny, and both stories are compelling and engaging. The twist at the end, though, is the absolute best part of the episode. I'm going to rate this episode 4 stars. There's only one part of this episode I legitimately don't like. It's a small thing, but it is kind of annoying. There's this reporter character named Mike, who's covering the chinchilla event, and I'm not gonna lie, he's pretty obnoxious and pretty stupid. Most of his dialogue is just him repeating what's going on without any hint of irony or self-awareness. This wouldn't be so bad, except his cameraman gives us nothing to coordinate the stupidity. He's not a very good foil for him. Thankfully, he only affects a tiny portion of the episode, but he really doesn't add anything either. Honestly, it feels like it was done just to get to the end where Candace tries to bust the boys to the reporter, only to have the helicopter be flown away. Still, it's a small part of the episode, and it doesn't deter it too much. 404B. Just desserts. Phineas and Ferb build a giant rock climb. Candace substitutes for Isabella's Fireside Girl obligations. Doofenshmirtz creates the Bring Out Dessert Inator. I'm a little split on this episode. I mean, on the one hand, there's nothing bad about it. All the plots are mostly solid. I just don't think this one is that funny. The Phineas and Ferb stuff is obviously fine, and I admit I'm more of a sucker for the sweet side of things, what with Candace stepping in and volunteering to fill in for Isabella's Fireside Girl obligations, just so she can spend time with Phineas. And yes, I know it was for her own selfish gains, but it was still nice to see. And Doof's story of making people crave desserts is okay. I think of the 3 stories, though, the best one is Candace's story. I'm finding myself loving when the show teams up Irving and Candace. I just think they bounce off each other very well. So her task is to record the entire Fireside Girls manual into audiobook form and pushes to do it in a single afternoon so she can be home in time to bust the boys. As a result of this, her voice becomes incredibly hoarse and inaudible. I also like to believe that Irving was trolling Candace hard with that line over there. And I like how her efforts fail because of her voice. And the funniest part is probably the end, where Ferb suggests tea with honey to help her throat, and all she can muster to say is, "He's so British." The other 2 plots are just fine. Phineas and Ferb's rock climbing experience goes about as you'd think. The Doof plot, though, is weird. Sure, the part where he and Perry are hopped up on sugar and jumping up and down repeatedly was amusing for a while, especially when Doof suggests near the end that they should do it again sometime, but that's really the only good highlight I can think of. His plan is to basically ruin his brother's fancy dinner party by making dessert come out early. Yeah, this is another one of those really stupid ones that's not really over-the-top stupid. And unfortunately, the fight scene isn't good either. It's basically just them shoving desserts into each other's mouths. I've seen more interesting animated food fights. This episode isn't bad by any stretch. I'd even say it's good, but I think I would just leave it at that. It's good. So it gets 3 stars. Of course, if an episode's worst crime is that it's just good, it's still doing a lot right. 405A. B-Day. Phineas and Ferb make a wading pool. Candace dabbles in emo. Doofenshmirtz plots to conquer the bees. So this is the last set of episodes where Segment A deals with the Phineas and Ferb side of the day, and Segment B deals with the Fireside Girls part of the day. And just like the last pair, the first segment is good, but just good. The Phineas and Ferb stuff is honestly nice, and I do enjoy it when the kids do nice things for other people, but at the same time, it's not that interesting. At least here it's not very interesting. Especially because it involves Linda. It might be because Linda is my least favorite character, but whatever. Doof's plot is alright, but it is a little boring. Honestly, the Mr. Tomato gag is probably the most memorable part about it. The plot I'm really invested in somehow is Candace's plot. You know, the one where she tries going emo after misinterpreting a magazine quiz because that's what teenagers do, I guess. It's actually pretty funny, especially when she attempts, and I use that term very loosely, attempts to write emo poetry. And if I'm being frank, I think the Candace plot is what saves this episode and brings it up to 3 stars. Like the last time, the first segment is good, but the second segment is much more interesting, much more funny, and much more entertaining. Which brings us to 405B, B story. Wait, B story? Oh, I see what they did there. Clever. Isabella and her troop are transformed into bees to earn the beekeeping patch. Puffin plots to become queen of the world after a rejection from Love Muffin. First off, I really love the continuity here, where the fly ray from Fly on the Wall comes back and is retooled to turn the troop into bees, and how they actually do get mixed up in Doof's evil plan, even though we don't see him very much in this episode. Part of me really likes the idea they establish with the Fireside Girls, where they can only attempt to earn a single patch twice before they're ineligible to try again. It makes Isabella's freakout at the beginning of the episode so much funnier. I also like how the girls are able to use their wits to get out of Doof's vacuum cleaner, and then again at the end to use the waggle dance to lure the bees back into their beehive. By the way, how in the hell did they get that sequence past the censors? Of course, they succeed at the end and earn their patches, and this is when, in the last episode, they return to Phineas and Ferb's backyard for the wading pool party. Also, I really love the honey joke they try at the end. That was not Phineas Land. Interpret it as you please, people. As far as the Puffin plot goes, I enjoyed this one much more than I did the one in Isabella and the Temple of Sap. For one, it's definitely a lot funnier this time around. I love the beginning where they show her being rejected by Love Muffin, and that it's none other than Doofenshmirtz himself who authorizes the letter. Yeah, you're not one to talk, bub. Her plan is to consume large amounts of royal jelly in order to become queen of the world. Like I said, it's definitely a lot funnier this time around. Of course, she's defeated by Pinky when she's immobilized in massive amounts of jelly and dragged away. Okay then. By the way, I love that she has a myself-a-copter this time around after the me-mobile last time. That's just great comedy. So yeah, I really love this one. It's a lot of fun with a lot of good jokes and funny moments, and both plots are really interesting, funny, and engaging. So yeah, like Isabella and the Temple of Sap, this episode gets 5 stars. Do I think this episode is as good as Isabella and the Temple of Sap? I think it's in the ballpark. For the show to still be pulling out amazing episodes like this deep into its run is pretty impressive. 406. Sidetracked. Agent P teams up with a former partner to fight their respective nemeses in Canada. So I've said in the past that this show isn't the greatest at conveying morals. Now that's not to say that the show needs to teach morals, obviously it doesn't. But when it does, it's not always the best at it. And it's kind of the same thing here. They try to weave in this underlying conflict with Perry and Lila Lollyberry, showcasing that apparently they had a falling out because she interfered with one of his missions a long time ago, and so he struggles to fully trust her. That is until the end when she reveals she had to interfere because his mission's failure would result in her getting closer to finding her nemesis, Professor Bannister. By the way, about that, I think it's cool that they set the opening sequence in Seattle. I don't know if it was an intentional callback to Meet Bliss in Seattle, but it was still cool. But here's what I don't get. Okay, Doofenshmirtz brings up that they're part of an exchange program where he and Bannister exchange evil schemes for a day, but does that mean that they only have 1 day to put them into action, or only 1 day to plan them and then put them into action? See, if they were planned months in advance, it would make a little more sense, because then it would make sense that Lila was trying to let the bad guys she let get away lead her to Bannister 2 months earlier, as I imagine that would take some incredibly intricate planning. If that wasn't the idea, then how would she know that letting them go would directly lead them to Bannister? Yeah, they mention that they're his henchmen, but was she tracking them the whole time? She's part of the Canadian branch of Auca. Don't the branches communicate with each other? If this was the plan the whole time, you'd think her boss would tell Monogram this, because that explanation would make a whole lot more sense than Perry just now having any Canadian jurisdiction. This entire thing is crucial to setting up Perry's apparent distrust of Lila, but when you break it down, there are plot holes all over the place. Sure, her letting the henchmen go so they could lead her to Bannister could have been for any scheme, but if the intention was that she was trying to find them for this specific scheme, they did not do a good job of setting that up. Not to mention that the excuse of Perry not having jurisdiction in Canada kind of goes away after the train scene with Doofenshmirtz. Yeah, it's never really brought up again. But that's all just one part of the episode. The episode as a whole, for what it is, I actually really like it. A lot. That whole thing I just explained is just one aspect, and it's annoying when you think about it, but even if they didn't try to set up Perry not trusting Lila, and this was just an ordinary team-up episode, I still think it would be really good. For one, the episode takes place mostly in Canada. That's already a plus. Secondly, I think this is one of the funniest two-parters of the entire series. I'm serious. I love the scene on the train where Lila and Perry just dick around with Doof by taking his fries and forcing him into a rage, which foils his social convention trap, which I just thought was hilarious. I also really like the handcar scene and the helicopter fight sequence. Both of those are just really well done, and in the latter's case, it's really funny. Now, as far as the whole two evil schemes by Doof and Bannister thing, they never actually explained what Doof's plan was, just that Bannister needed to flip a switch on to make it work. I get that it's supposed to be a joke, and I am assuming that whatever it was what resulted in Phineas and Ferb's big idea getting lifted in the air by a cloud at the end of the episode. But yeah, clearly it's not meant to be important. Bannister's plan is the one that gets all the attention, and his plan is to steal a moose, which is apparently Canada's symbol of unity, take it to Greenland, then annex Canada to Greenland, bring back the moose, and reinvigorate the national pride. It's about as stupid as it sounds, and while it's not over the top funny, it is kind of funny to see how passionate he is about this plan. Also, I love the new national anthem that he writes for Greenland. The second half of the episode is honestly some of the best material of this show. From the helicopter fight, to Bannister's scheme, to his eventual defeat, it's all really great. It's definitely one of the better half-hour episodes of the series. And honestly, despite those complaints I lodged in the first half of this review, I think this episode is worthy of 5 stars. See, the more cool things that the show introduces, the more I want them to come back, and the more disappointed I am when they don't. I really wish we could have seen Lila again. Episode 407A. Not my problem. Phineas and Ferb recreate an impossibly difficult knot. Candace is tasked with opening Jeremy's personal mini-safe. Doofenshmirtz schemes to eliminate every all-you-can-eat buffet. While I don't consider this one of the more out-and-out hilarious episodes of the season, it's still a really good episode. The Phineas and Ferb stuff is exactly what you'd expect. The kids recreate one of history's most difficult knots and then challenge themselves to untie it. Candace's plot is actually pretty decent too. After she accepts Phineas' proposition that she get Mom if the kids are unable to untie themselves, she gets shelled with trying to open Jeremy's mini-safe, while wondering what's inside of it. I really like how the musical number beautifully manages to intertwine both Phineas and Ferb's story and Candace's story and make it flow naturally. That's pretty impressive. And of course, Doof's plot is by far the silliest. He creates an Inator that makes one person so hungry that they can eat an entire buffet of food and still be hungry. It's weird that we have a food-related Doof plot right after his dessert-related plot in Just Desserts, but I think this one is funnier, just because they actually do more with the food than just have a plain old food fight. My favorite part is when Doof explains to a random customer how his Inator works, and then he suggests that Doof mass-produce the Inator in order to make money, and Doof rebuffs him by pointing out how needlessly convoluted his scheme is. I love the self-awareness of this show. And of course it makes sense when his Inator misfires and hits Candace, causing her to devour the entire Gordian knot, which was conveniently made out of licorice. And it does have a nice ending where we see the inside of the mini-safe, and inside was a pencil from many years ago that Candace apparently bit into and Jeremy has been keeping in his safe all these years. I think Candace puts it best. Gross, but cute. Anyway, this episode may not be one of the most fantastic ones out there, but it's still very enjoyable, and I think there are enough funny jokes here. And the nice ending really tops it all off. So I'm going to go ahead and give this episode 4 stars. The only thing I actually don't like is the wordplay joke they try at the beginning with Phineas and Buford. I don't exactly know why, but I feel like it carries on just a little bit too long. 407B, Mind Share. The kids switch bodies with alien criminals. Doofenshmirtz tries to impress a square dancing girl. Yeah, I don't really like this episode that much. And it has nothing to do with the fact that the Phineas plot and the Doof plot don't intertwine. Yeah, the funny thing is, I don't mind when the show occasionally doesn't intertwine the two plots. I don't mind when they're separate. And I actually do like Doof's plot in this episode. It's the Phineas and Ferb plot I don't like. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of the Shawshank Redemption, which this episode heavily homages, and unfortunately, this is a case of, if you don't like or don't know the movie the episode is homaging or parodying, then you're probably not going to like the episode. Now, if you do like the movie, chances are you'll get more enjoyment out of this episode. But even beyond that, the idea of them switching places with mutant aliens for a mind share vacation is weird. Like, I just can't wrap my mind around the idea that, after visiting space several times over the course of the series, that this idea would be in any way all that awe-inspiring. I mean, on paper, this sounds like an interesting idea, but to be honest, the prison setting just turns me off. It's a shame too, because I do like the parts where Candace assists them in getting back home by tricking the alien criminals back onto the mindshare pad and getting sent back to prison. I even like the gag where Candace just believes Phineas' story without even questioning the logistics of it. And I guess Buford's quip about knowing how prison works and then being called out for it was kind of amusing, but that's about it. Thankfully, the Doof plot is better, and it puts the episode comfortably into the meh category, a 2-star rating. So Doofenshmirtz wants to impress a woman he met over the internet who's really into square dancing. I really like his justification for doing this scheme, saying, everybody stretches the truth on the internet, which is both an incredibly true fact and a sort of nice callback to the episode Let's Bounce, although I don't think it was directly intentional based on the writing. He creates a pair of boots that respond to commands of a square dance caller, translating into Doof following the commands himself. The plan actually goes fairly well, and the woman, named Rose, even asks him to dinner, until the end credits scene where they pass by a boombox playing a hip-hop song, which forces the boots to react and for Doof to start boogieing like there's no tomorrow, effectively turning her off. I'm very glad Disney doesn't follow Nickelodeon's lead in playing the credits during the last 30 seconds of any actual episode, because then this credit scene wouldn't play and people would be left just confused at the ending. Like I said, the Phineas and Ferb stuff I just don't care for very much, but the Doof stuff is salvageable enough to bring this up to 2 stars. 408. Primal Perry. Perry and Doofenshmirtz band together to outlast a professional platypus hunter. Phineas and Ferb help Baljeet through his existential crisis. For as much as I love Sidetracked, I think this episode is just as good, if not a little better. So the story is Doofenshmirtz has hired a professional platypus hunter named Leah McCracken to capture Perry for him, and his motivations for doing it are absolutely the best. Apparently he blames a platypus for being so cute that it distracted his mother and she didn't notice his stroller rolling away, as opposed to blaming the mother for being careless and neglectful. Anyway, he proves to be a formidable threat to Perry, much to Doof's delight, until Liam basically goes rogue and double-crosses Doof, trapping him as well. Then he handcuffs them both together and forces them to run off so he can chase them. Oh, and there's this gag where midway through, Perry loses his fedora, so Doof starts referring to him as Steven, because apparently the joke that Doof can't recognize Perry without his fedora isn't dead yet. They team up and stand up to Liam by working together, making traps using the garden's surrounding, and through their quick wit and great use of science, they annoy Liam and drive him more and more mad. But of course, right when he gets the upper hand again, Doof comes in and saves the day by bringing in 2 elderly ladies that apparently oversee this garden and have Liam kicked out. Okay, I should explain. So this plot takes place in a botanical garden where Liam apparently has taken residence in, and these 2 elderly ladies are tasked with overseeing and making sure the rules are followed. They reprimanded Doof early in the episode for making smoke signals, and then reprimand Liam for standing on the grass, because apparently that's against the rules. And funny enough, they kick Liam out in a stroller, because, of course. The story is just fantastic, as is the comedy. One of the best jokes is that Liam apparently has a large stash of boomerangs, and he gives them all different names, like they're little peoples. The absolute best, though, is probably the end where he tries to claim that the garden is his home, and then it's revealed that he was actually born in Pittsburgh. I love that joke so much. The only thing that might bother me is the fact that, yeah, Doofenshmirtz hired Liam to begin with, which could be seen as a dick move, but I'm more bothered with the fact that it's never really addressed again after its initial introduction. In fact, you could have cut that out of the episode entirely, and the story would be exactly the same, but that's a very minute nitpick. Everything in this plot is just fantastic. I even like the ending gag where Doof tries to get Perry and Steven to meet, and it's just not working for him. I love that joke. And while I don't think the Phineas and Ferb stuff is quite as good, it's still fantastic in its own right. Baljeet's going through a crisis where he's basically paralyzed by indecision. The similarities between this and Cranius Maximus pretty much end here, because this episode's plot is infinitely better. See, it works here because his dilemma is so relatable. We've all been paralyzed in one way or another by indecision at some point in our lives. It's certainly more relatable than taking 3 minutes to figure out how to work a freaking CAT scan. So to help, Phineas and Ferb build the infinite probability generator, which basically splits Baljeet every time he has to make a choice. It starts off innocently enough, but then halfway through it turns into this really weird mob mentality-esque story where a bunch of Baljeets decide to gang up on Buford. It's both incredibly strange and incredibly hilarious. Of course, they don't get the chance to do that, as a giant boomerang from Liam swoops in, breaks the big idea, causing the Baljeets to revert back into one. And that's pretty much it. I really love both musical numbers too. They're both extremely funny and visually interesting too. Both of these plots are just so engaging and so hilarious that I keep coming back to this episode time after time. This episode absolutely deserves 6 stars. Now, you're probably wondering what's pushing it into 6 stars that Sidetracked doesn't have. Well, that's easy. This episode has another subplot involving Monogram and Carl. It's just basically them stuck in the Flynn Fletcher home vents trying to find a way out. And my absolute favorite part is the end where Carl reveals that he not only got out of the vents, but he also found his cousin Larry and brought him back just to introduce him to Monogram. That part was absolutely beautiful. I was on the floor laughing. That one subplot alone helps bring this episode up to 6 stars. Episode 409A, La Cabra. The kids set out to prove the existence of the chupracabra. Doofenshmirtz plots to sell hair-growing tonic. Ignoring the fact that we've already had The Lake-Nosed Monster, an episode where the boys tried to prove the existence of Nosy, this episode is just not as funny or engaging as that episode. I did kind of laugh at the scene where Buford was dressed as Isabella, but it was more of a what the hell kind of laugh. Also, the scene with Carl hosting a sensitivity training session with everyone at Elka was pretty funny too, but that's really it. I just don't find this as enjoyable as The Lake-Nosed Monster, save for a few scenes. I think one of the biggest reasons is because this one is only 11 minutes long, so the tension is drastically down. Lake-Nosed Monster was 22 minutes, so there was at least a sense that the stakes were a little higher. Here, not so much. I'm sure many will find this episode to be really funny and entertaining, and that's fine, but it's just not for me. Oh, and Doof's plot isn't really that great either. So, he invents a hair growth formula, which in and of itself is not a bad idea, but then they throw in the switch place Inator to transfer someone's hair from their back and put it on another one's bald head, and it just really makes it stupid. I know that that's the intention, but I think the plot was needlessly convoluted, and it could have been really funny if maybe instead of that, they did something like SpongeBob in Mermaid Man vs. SpongeBob, where, I don't know, the hair growth formula was a hypnosis or something like that. This just really isn't that funny. Unfortunately, I have to give this episode 2 stars. There's nothing in this episode that's inherently bad, but it's not as entertaining or funny as other episodes. 409B. Happy birthday, Isabella. The kids celebrate Isabella's birthday. Doofenshmirtz creates the Bugs Me Inator. I remember being absolutely in love with this episode when it first came out. Watching it again all this time later, and with a critical eye, it's not the perfect love fest I remembered it to be, but it's still a really good episode. I'm gonna get this out of the way first, though. The Doof plot is stupid. Like, really stupid. The only memorable thing about it is Doof mentioning how he hates being mistaken for a pharmacist. The other memorable thing? Well, take a wild guess what that might be. The coolest part about it, though, is that Stacy does not get mind-wiped like everyone did in Across the Second Dimension. This was like the equivalent of SpongeBob getting his license. You just don't expect that to happen. Unfortunately, this is never referenced in any way whatsoever again, which just really sucks. Like, it's not even referenced in a passing. Still, it is really cool to see this unfold within this episode, and I was really loving the connection they were making with Perry and Stacy. Stacy clearly understands the gravity of knowing this secret, and I truly believe if she had been put in a situation where his safety depended on her keeping that secret, that she would come through easily. Unfortunately, we never see anything like that before the series ends, and I have to wonder if there really was ever anything in the works related to this. But that is a small thing. This one scene, in my opinion, does justify the boringness and stupidity of Doof's plot. As for the Phineas and Ferb stuff, it's really nice too. All Isabella wants is time alone with Phineas for her birthday, but nobody seems to get that. But Phineas does throw her an extravagant party that ends with a finale that both ends up being botched because of the Doof plot, but also being well received by Isabella. She expresses really genuine gratitude for it, and I'm actually glad they did that. This could have been easily written as her being frustrated that she didn't get her way, even though he put in a lot of effort for this party, and I'm glad that they don't go down that route. And lucky for her, she ends up getting her alone time with Phineas on an ice cream date after all. And that quote over there to end the episode really gets me every time. What I love here is that even though Isabella isn't getting her way throughout most of the episode, she still clearly recognizes the effort that Phineas put into throwing this extravagant party. He's thinking along the lines of a friend, and that's what she seems to be finally embracing. It's cute, it's sweet, and it's something that I thought the show was trying to build up to when the episode Act Your Age came along. Unfortunately, the problem is, after having watched that episode, it's hard to go back and watch other episodes or scenes where those two are put in a romantic, non-romantic situation and they connect. I'll talk more about that when I finally get to that episode, but yeah. But with that said, this episode taken on its own, the story is really sweet and wonderful to watch, and it does bring the episode up in my eyes. So on the whole, I say the episode gets 4 stars. And again, the issue I mentioned earlier, I'll bring it back to the forefront when the appropriate episode comes up. Episode 410A, Great Balls of Water. Phineas and Ferb create a giant ball of water primed for surfing. Candace sets out to be extraordinary. Doofenshmirtz creates the double negative Inator. This is a perfect example of an episode that's perfectly good. The Phineas and Ferb stuff is fine, and it's actually a neat visual treat to see a giant mobile ball of water, though there's nothing really to it. Doofenshmirtz's plot is about as funny as you'd expect, with his double negative Inator resulting in an innocent man going to jail. That was hilarious, and I feel bad for finding it funny, and I also did kind of like the beginning joke with Perry and director Diphthong. It's so dumb, but it's brief, and there is some good lines thrown at Diphthong's expense. Oh, and Doof's rant at the end about how Perry always leaves a mess when he foils his plan, and then Vanessa walks in and hears all of it, had me cackling like an idiot. I actually do kind of enjoy Candace's plot, even if it is very simple. She thinks she's become too repetitive and boring to keep Jeremy interested, so she decides to mix it up. Like, a lot. And the montage is actually pretty nice to see. But even better is the end where Jeremy asks Candace to the mall and he says, "We're teenagers, it's what we do." And now that I'm thinking about it, I wonder if this was supposed to be a subtle commentary on the criticisms of the show being repetitive in its formula. Nah, this show wouldn't stoop down to addressing its critics. Oh, and there's another brief subplot involving Buford where he enters his pet fish Biff into a fish show and goes up against Rodney, because of course he does, and ends up winning because reasons. It's weird, but I weirdly like the show the best of any of them in the episode. I kind of wanted to see it all play out. I'll take what I can get. The episode isn't anything special, but it's perfectly passable, so it gets 3 stars. 410B, Where's Pinky? Perry and Pinky team up to stop Doofenshmirtz from stealing the tri-state area's deed. Phineas and Ferb create a Pinky tracker. Candace gets stuck in a City Hall tour. I like the idea of the Doof plot, both in him trying to steal the deed, and in Perry and Pinky teaming up. The only 2 major issues I have with this is 1. In Perry the Octopus, Doof makes a big deal about a rule that states only one Alka agent can defeat a nemesis at a time. Yet here they are, being teamed up by Monogram. I suppose perhaps the implication is supposed to be that an agent can't interfere with another agent's ongoing mission unless that agent is unable to fulfill their duties. But that's not the same thing as what was implied in that episode. Number 2, I feel like this was a missed opportunity on their end. We've already had 2 Perry team-up episodes that were 22 minutes, in Primal Perry and Sidetracked, but this one is only 11 minutes, so the tension kind of feels down. Now with that said, I still enjoy this plot just fine. I think there's some good chemistry between Perry and Pinky, and Doof has a lot of funny lines here too, but I still feel like it was a bit of wasted potential. The Phineas and Ferb plot is actually a little weird for me. So first off, we're retreading "Oh, there you are, Perry," but this time instead of music, The boys make a giant metal head for Buford that specializes in tracking Pinky. I actually think this is a little stupid. But only a little stupid. And honestly, the scene where Isabella and Phineas pop through the doggy door to City Hall together was pretty cute. But the Candace plot is by far the funniest. Beyond her frustrated reactions to having to be stuck on this mandatory tour, why would they make it mandatory anyway? Combined with Wayne Brady just hamming it up as the tour guide and demonstrating his character is clearly not well, this plot is just straight up fun. And also his musical number is one of the best ones of Season 4. I'm serious too. It's so well written and well composed, plus it's just so damn catchy. Also, what City Hall hosts lunch? Seriously. But yeah, I do enjoy this episode. The Candace plot is what pushes the episode up so highly, but the other two plots are totally fine and they each have a charm to it. So this episode gets 4 stars. Alright, here we go. 411 to 412. Phineas and Ferb. Mission Marvel. Phineas and Ferb team up with some of Marvel's greatest heroes to stop their arch-enemies and Doofenshmirtz from taking over the world. So, I have a bit of a confession to make. I'm not exactly a Marvel guy. Honestly, superhero movies in general don't really appeal to me, except for maybe Spider-Man, before Sony rebooted it so many times. Now, I am familiar enough with the heroes to go into this and not be completely lost, but yeah, this is another case where if you don't like the premise, in this case it being a crossover with Marvel and their superheroes, then you might not like the episode. But I actually do like this one, very much. First of all, this giant crossover special for this little cartoon, 100% earned. No arguments here. And I love how the show manages to keep the charm of Phineas and Ferb, incorporate the Marvel characters in tactfully, and stay true to the Marvel characters. There's always the chance in any crossover that's not fanfiction that the new characters coming into your show will be written and acted so terribly that it serves as an insult to the original source material. But that's not a problem here, at all. Not only that, but the action scenes we get, especially in the final act, are amazing. The best this show has ever done. Period. They're just beautiful to watch. But it's not all action. There's a lot of really good funny jokes in this special too. The team up with Doof and the Marvel villains is just hilarious to watch, and there's a great and suspenseful atmosphere that really no other episode has been able to replicate. You really get the sense that the stakes in this episode are higher than ever, which would explain the tension our main characters feel while they're trying to help the hero stop the villains. Unfortunately, this special is not without its problems. Piggying back to the point I just made, there's an aura of stress and tension that clouds our main characters, especially Phineas. Firstly, why is it that the first time he screams at Candace and reprimands her is harsher and louder than the second time? You would think it would be the other way around. I get why he would be screaming, the stakes are ridiculous and obviously Candace's incompetence can't be tolerated if it's not working out, but it is still very jarring, especially because his second outburst isn't as pronounced as his first. Secondly, I may be in the minority here, but I actually found the apology scene at the end to Candace, you know, after she saves the heroes and gets their powers back, I found that scene to be not insincere, but with a hint of insincerity. I don't mean in the sense that he's a terrible character and he's only saying it to get back on her good side, because I do believe he means it. No, I mean it comes off as insincere because of the voice acting in that scene. It's not that great. For whatever reason, this show occasionally struggles to project genuine emotions during a scene where it's needed. It comes off as them just going through the motions of a scene like this and not actually feeling what they say they're feeling. Okay, Phineas fixed up the shed membership card he ripped up from Candace in the earlier part of the episode and offers it back to her. Great. But he doesn't necessarily sound that genuine about it. I don't necessarily blame the characters and I don't necessarily blame the writing. More so, I think it's the direction of the voice acting here that fails. The writing for this show is typically very good, so when the voice acting doesn't do it justice, it does kind of offend me. Another problem is during the second half of the special, after Candace is told off a second time, she comes in moping in her room, and then Isabella comes in being all mopey too. This literally makes no sense whatsoever. No, I mean, it literally makes no sense. It should not be in the special at all. It was not set up well. I mean, earlier in the special, Buford does kind of mock her for being a girl, and I have to assume that's supposed to be the catalyst for her feeling like this, but that's really fucking dumb. Why? Well, for one, in episodes like Got Game, she's shown to not take any crap from him anyway, and she's always tolerant of his sexist, stupid ways. because she always gets the upper hand on him. So him being what makes her all mopey doesn't make sense at all. Yeah, they also try to establish briefly that she's also bummed because there are no female superheroes in this special. And yes, that is a problem, but here's the thing. Aside from that one mention from Isabella, the lack of female superheroes isn't even brought up again. It's never mentioned by any of the characters, and it's never even viewed as a problem. Dan and Jeff said at the 2013 San Diego Comic-Con that that would be an issue addressed, but no, it's actually not addressed at all. At least not in a way you would think it would be addressed. It's just casually mentioned and then dropped. This really baffles me. I would like to think that maybe there was a plan to expand on this more that was incorporated into an original draft that was later dropped for whatever reason. Maybe it was cut for time. But then this should have been reworked. There needed to be another reason for Isabella to be upset. Maybe if Phineas had snapped at her as well, then it would make more sense. If the lack of female superheroes was meant to be a bigger plot point in an original draft, fine, but unfortunately I can only critique what's in the final product. These are two of the biggest glaring problems that do harm this special, but they're not so big that they absolutely ruin it, and honestly everything else is just fine. I enjoyed Doof's interactions with the villains. I liked how at the end, Doof thinks he was the one that solved all the problems and saved the day, and he was annoyed that nobody was paying attention. My favorite jokes from the whole thing were the Howard the Duck reference, mainly because of Iron Man's delivery, and Candace trying to get the heroes to read her fanfiction. I just love how much of a geek she is for these superheroes. Overall, despite the flaws in this special and the curious creative choices, I do enjoy the special a lot, and I think it was a very good crossover. It did both the Marvel universe and the Phineas and Ferb universe justice. And for that, I give this episode 4 stars. And to think, this is only the first of 6 total hour-long specials in Season 4. Holy smokes. Episode 413A. Thanks, but no thanks. Candace discovers that a neighbor has witnessed all of the summer's big ideas. Carl enlists Monty into soliciting a thank you from Monogram. Doofenshmirtz creates the Inflator Inator. This is a little bit of a weird one for me. I don't think the episode is bad, but I definitely don't remember it the way I used to. The idea for the Candace plot is interesting, but it's ultimately boring. It's just Candace going to the same house over and over, trying to get this elderly lady out of her house to talk to her mother. And at the end, she ends up getting arrested. Apparently, she was running a pyramid scheme. Look, I feel like the only reason they did it that way was to justify a connection between that and Phineas and Ferb's big idea, which was pyramid sports. But no, just no. There's not really anything here. The Doof plot is also kind of forgettable, although I did find the parts where he and Perry were both inflated to be really funny. But that's it. And what I'm going to call the Carl plot is kind of stupid. I always thought the idea that Monogram and Carl having a sort of father-son relationship was really sweet, but here it's a little creepy and really annoying. Carl wants a thank you from Monogram, but he leads off by saying he wants Monty disowned by Francis so he can be adopted as a son. I'm sure that's supposed to be funny, but I actually found that to be a little creepy. Although Monty's response to that was kind of funny. I also found it really hilarious when Carl started mocking Monty with the kissing song, but then demonstrated that he doesn't know how the rest of it goes. Honestly, I think the biggest problem with this episode is that it tries to do too much, and absolutely nothing is fleshed out. The stuff with the elderly neighbor is not that funny or interesting. The Phineas and Ferb stuff gets little to no focus at all. The Doof plot is boring, and the Carl plot is very annoying and tedious. So on the whole, this is a disappointing episode. It gets 2 stars. I'm usually all for material with Carl and Monogram, but here it's just uninteresting and a little annoying. 413B, Troy Story. Phineas and Ferb finally reenact the Trojan War. Doofenshmirtz develops a clutter problem. One of the show's most underappreciated aspects is its continuity. I don't mean in the sense that it has a season-long story arc, or a series-long story arc, although I guess the Isabella-Phineas relationship thing is the closest thing they have to that. No, I mean in the sense that they can go back to their early episodes and reference them very cleverly and subtly. Take this episode, for example. Phineas clearly says that they're finally going to reenact the Trojan War. If you'll recall, they were originally going to do it in the episode I Scream, You Scream, but they intentionally put it off because of Isabella's tonsillectomy. Of course, they put their own unique spin on the war, and it's very visually pleasant and funny and interesting. Their entire plot is basically just them trying to comedically reenact the war, and it even ties well into Candace's plot. She has to read a book on the Trojan War for her book club, but instead she decides to be lazy like a teenager and watch the kids' reenactment of it. She relays that to the book club thinking that it would suffice. And I love the ending scene where she basically makes a fool out of herself and they just shrug it off like they don't care. As for the Doof plot, well, I don't think it's quite as good as the Phineas and Ferb plot. It's still very enjoyable, and it has its share of funny moments. So we find out that he's become quite the hoarder, and as a result, his lairs become extremely cluttered. He built himself a declutter Inator to help himself clean it up, but unfortunately, he lost that in the clutter too, so he hires a cleaning lady to help him, but she gets lost too. I really love the Marco Polo and overtime joke that Doof did with the cleaning lady, but my absolute favorite part is at the end, when Doof's lair is finally decluttered because explosion, and she comes out and hands him an invoice and says, "You'll be hearing from my lawyer." That was fantastic. So while I don't think this episode is one of the all-time greats of Season 4, it is definitely, in my opinion, very underrated and very underappreciated. So, I'm going to give this episode 4 stars. 414A, Love at First Bite. Phineas and Ferb plan the grand finale for the block party. Doofenshmirtz attempts to set Norm up with a female robot. This episode is fine, but it is a little boring for me, so I wasn't sure how to rate it. The Phineas and Ferb stuff is actually kind of enjoyable. I think it's nice that they decide to help Linda set up the grand finale for the block party, and the presentation itself is pretty cool. Plus, I am a sucker for episodes where Phineas and Ferb decide to help other people with their big ideas instead of just for themselves. But this plot is more of a backdrop to the Doof plot in this episode. So Doof and Norm come across a female robot named Chloe, and she and Norm hit it off. They have some awkward dialogue, which, to be fair, was kind of amusing, and the musical number they had together was, in all honesty, a little entertaining. It's not one of my favorite songs, but I did sort of like the visuals. But there isn't that much going on here. Doof doesn't really serve much of a purpose beyond giving Norm horrible advice, but not much of it is really funny. In fact, Perry doesn't even serve any purpose in this episode. He doesn't interact with Doof or Norm, or hell, even Monogram after he's given his mission. I don't necessarily mind this in and of itself, but then why even have him in the episode at all? Honestly, the funniest part of the episode was probably Candace's antics. She wants to bust the boys, but in a funny twist, because it was Linda who enlisted their help to begin with, she can't technically bust them at all. So watching her in this episode be kind of mopey and sad that she's helpless to do anything was honestly kind of hilarious. I liked this twist, and Candace's reactions throughout the episode are just hilarious, and they are easily the funniest stuff in the episode. And then we have the ending, where Linda goes to thank the boys for the party, only to, quote-unquote, bust them for leaving a bunch of dirty towels on the ground. She actually sounds kind of angry at this, which I'm not sure if this was meant to be a joke, like that classic joke where one character gets over-exaggeratedly angry over something so insignificant. If it was supposed to be a joke, it was not conveyed well at all, especially since literally with her next sentence, she seemingly gets over it, which is weird. I'll admit that Candace's reaction to this revelation was a tad amusing, but that's it. Oh, and it turns out Chloe was built by none other than Doof's archenemy, Rodney, who angrily drags her away, prompting Doof to follow suit with Norm, thus separating these two lovers from their moment. Aww, how sad. If only I cared more. Yeah, the problem with this is that she never makes another appearance again or is even mentioned by anyone. I'm not even kidding with that. I was kind of hoping they would bring her back so they do something with this whole romance, non-romance thing. I mean, since the show clearly isn't doing this kind of thing with Monty and Vanessa, they could at least make it funny with Norm and Chloe. But no, she never comes back. And to be honest, because of all this, it sort of makes this plot kind of pointless. I honestly wasn't sure what to rate this episode. On the one hand, there are the issues with the plots, the fact that some of the characters don't have any role, and that odd ending. On the other hand, though, there are some funny bits, like the awkward robot talk, Candace's antics, and I suppose the revelation that Chloe was built by Rodney is kind of funny in and of itself. I think what ultimately helped my decision was the song. When I first watched this episode, I didn't like the song very much. I didn't think it was very catchy, and I thought it was very generic, but the song is kind of growing on me, both stylistically and visually. So I think that was what pushed me over the edge, and what helped me finalize my rating. After all of this, I'm giving this episode 3 stars. It is a rather low 3 stars, because I think if I had still decided I didn't like the song, I would have given this 2 stars. But that, plus the fact that they did make Norm and Chloe's interactions somewhat amusing, coupled with Candace's plot antics, it gives me just enough to feel confident in this rating. 414B, One Good Turn. Stacy teams up with Candace to beat an obstacle course built by Phineas and Ferb. Doofenshmirtz plots to utilize old homeland traditions to humiliate Mayor Roger. I enjoy this episode quite a bit. So, first off, it's nice to see them showing off Stacy and Ginger's sisterly bond, even if it is very brief. Stacy has a bit of an inferior complex compared to Ginger, because Ginger's won countless trophies and Stacy, well, she hasn't won any. But unlike other shows, in this one, there's never a sense of hostility in Stacy when she tries to win the obstacle course. There's no lingering resentment or even jealousy on any level. Most shows don't really do this. Now, admittedly, it makes the heartwarming moment at the end of the episode not as strong, but it is still sweet. I like the obstacle course itself too, and I love how basically Buford and Baljeet are non-factors from the start. There's a great joke where Phineas points out the mud in one of the obstacles, and then it's revealed that it was Baljeet's suggestion, and all he can say is, "I knew we would not get that far." And Isabella's line, "I regret nothing," after she and Ginger are knocked out of the lead is pretty hilarious. And the Doof plot is pretty damn funny too. He uses an old tradition of Gimmelstump, or I guess Stumblegimp, which is the name of another town, to humiliate his brother during an important meeting. Apparently it's frowned upon when one turns 90 degrees in the presence of the Stumblegimp mayor, and whenever that happens, the offender has to do a very humiliating and exhaustive dance of contrition in order to make things right. The dance itself, as well as the song, are just knee-slap hilarious. Even funnier is the apparent updated version of this dance that Roger performs later in the episode. And my favorite part is Doof's reaction to all of it. This is one of those episodes that grew on me the more I watched it. I found myself laughing more at the jokes and feeling more and more satisfied over the emotional moments. All in all, this is a great episode, worthy of 4 stars. Episode 415A, Cheers for Fears. Candace struggles to get the perfect birthday gift for Jeremy. Doofenshmirtz battles his worst fears after an Inator goes haywire. This is a good episode. And that's about it. So, ignoring that this is the 11th birthday mentioned throughout the series, the plot about Candace trying to find the perfect gift is honestly kind of sweet. She enlists the help of Phineas and Ferb, who build a giant scrapbook-related ride for Jeremy, only for it to be blown away, resulting in her left with just her simple Jeremy-centric scrapbook. It was a nice moment. The plot itself is very simple, and there aren't that many jokes, although I will say I enjoyed Buford mistranslating Candace's sullen talk twice. Doof's plot is perfectly okay too. He makes the worst fear Inator, which makes the victim have their worst fears come true. He even uses it on Perry and nothing happens. Yeah, I kind of wish the joke here had been that it was something very insignificant that scares Perry, like, I don't know, dust bunnies, or commitment. They're always saying Perry will never get a girlfriend because he's quote-unquote married to his job. This was a prime opportunity to fully capitalize on that joke, but no, they don't do that. Doof gets hit with his own Inator, and his worst fear, vending machines coming to life to take over the world, a nice callback to the movie, comes to life. And of course, Perry saves him. And that's about it. It's not much, but it's funny enough, and there is a sweet undertone here with Perry looking out for Doof, even if he did initially try to leave, which I thought was kind of funny. This episode is perfectly fine. There's nothing bad about it, but there's nothing that stands out spectacularly either. So, it gets 3 stars. Also, there's this weird bit where Isabella stays basically silent for the entire episode until the very end. It turns out she was practicing for getting a patch that requires 24 hours of complete silence. It doesn't mean anything, I just thought it was interesting. 415B, Just Our Luck. Thanks to Doofenshmirtz's Good Luck Inator, the kids end up with bad luck, and Candace ends up with good luck. The stories are relatively simple. The kids try to make a zipline structure to play sky tennis and make the most of their bad luck by adjusting on the fly with everything that gets thrown their way. Actually, now that I think about it, it eerily reminds me of a current show that Dan and Swampy also created. I wonder if this was the inspiration for that show. Meanwhile, Doof tries to use his good luck Inator to try to change Roger's good luck to bad luck so he can take over, I guess. Because that's totally how it works. I love Doof's flawed logic. Honestly, not that much is going on in these stories. During the Doof plot, Perry is asleep for most of it because they explain that he pulled an all-nighter filling in for another agent. Poor Perry, he really needs a vacation. But I absolutely love the jokes they tell here. Like having the Sklar brothers being the commentators for the tennis game and then being kicked out because they apparently don't have permits? I also love the joke where Doofenshmirtz complains about his encounter with genies. A great callback to the Lake Nose Monster. I love the Planty the Potted Plant cameo and how Monogram says they need to reassign him because he was discovered by Linda. That was honestly my favorite joke of the whole episode. I remember thinking when this first came out that it was one of the funniest episodes I had seen in such a long time, and while I no longer have that high of an opinion, I still really enjoy these jokes, and I do like the plots, and I do think this is an underrated episode, so I'm giving this one 4 stars. 416A, Return Policy. Doofenshmirtz invents the Back to the Store Inator. Phineas and Ferb create an extreme baseball challenge. Candace visits the extreme water park. There are a couple of decent bits from this episode that I enjoy. For example, the bits with Isabella and Phineas commenting on the baseball challenge, and Isabella's occasional crazy streak, was pretty cute and amusing. The show managed to do a funny fart joke, only its second one, and that's really it. The baseball challenge is honestly the best part of the episode. It's entertaining enough, but the stuff with Candace getting roped up in buying hygiene products, and then going to the water park with Jeremy, and then Linda getting upset at Candace for not telling her, none of that is really that interesting. Jeremy and Candace do have that sweet moment at the end of the episode, but I just end up not caring for her endeavors this time around. Even the song isn't that engaging, and Doof's plot is just so dumb, but not in an over-the-top manner of dumb that would make this tolerable. I guess the bit where he zaps an item back to the store and gets his change in pennies was kind of amusing. Sort of, I guess, but not really. A lot of it is just stupid and not very interesting or funny. So, yeah, this episode is not that good. I give it 2 stars. I enjoy the Phineas and Ferb plot just fine, and the best jokes of the episode do come from that plot, but it's just that one plot, and even in that regard, it's not that great. 416B, Imperfect Storm. Phineas and Ferb create a wind amplifier. Doofenshmirtz plans petty revenge. Linda gets a backyard makeover. The Phineas and Ferb stuff is perfectly fine. You've heard me say that about a bunch of Phineas plots at this point, but here, the Doof plot, and I guess the Linda plot, really pull the episode way up. Doof plans revenge on a woman he thinks was a childhood tormentor, who constantly dunked water on his head. And when he goes through with this plan, we get introduced to a woman who we and Doof assume is the one he spoke of, until it's revealed that it isn't, and what ensues is absolutely hilarious. Turns out that this woman, named Grulinda, dunked water on Doof as a child because she liked him. Yeah, apparently that's a thing in Druselstein. I don't get it either. But then when she questions him on why he was going to do it to her, the mean woman whom Doof initially accused earlier comes back and outs Doof, and so Grulinda rejects him. That was absolutely fantastic. One of the best parts of the episode. And even though the other plot is Linda's plot, it's surprisingly pretty funny. So Linda hired these gardeners to make over her backyard. Each thing they try disappoints her until the very end, where she calls their latest idea the most sweet and adorable thing she's ever seen, and it apparently offends one of them for some reason. Yeah, his reaction is absolutely hilarious. And of course the end where Linda tries to show Candace what they did, and it's all gone, and Candace thinks Linda's mocking her, that was pretty funny too. Okay, see, throughout the episode Linda told Candace about what happened, but here's the thing, the gardeners' names are Du Bois, pronounced like the boys, so Candace misunderstood her and thought she was talking about Phineas and Ferb. This makes the ultimate punchline at the end work so much better than what they tried to do in What Do It Do. Plus, having it just be a one-off joke and not a continuous plot point throughout the episode also helps a lot. This episode is definitely a real treat. I give it 4 stars. Easy. It's definitely not surprising that the show is able to pull off good episodes like this deep into its run, but the fact that these are some of the funniest jokes of the entire show is what's surprising me. 417A, Steampunks. Lawrence recounts events from a World's Fair from the early 20th century. Yeah, not much I can really say about this one. It's basically a time shift episode, except we start off in present day, and it's more of a flashback kind of episode, so not really. The plots are simple. Basically, 1903 Phineas and Ferb invent a steam-powered machine that helps them with their chores, while 1903 Doofenshmirtz wants to destroy the World Fair. Pretty simple, and they tell all the jokes you'd expect from this time period, like churning butter, shucking corn. Oh, and there's a dating joke that revolves around the word courting. My favorite parts are with Perry. I'm sorry, I mean Sweary the Swan. I don't exactly know why, but I feel like those jokes were the best ones. And I did really like the musical number in this episode. Nothing in this episode really stands out, but there's nothing wrong with it either. So it all adds up to a perfectly respectable 3 stars. 417B. It's no picnic. Isabella and Phineas have a picnic. Doofenshmirtz invents the teleport Inator. One episode aside, I do like the fact that this season put a little more of a focus on Isabella and Phineas. They gave a good foundation for them to work off of, especially in season 4. First with Happy Birthday Isabella, and now this episode. The story is simple. With everyone else having plans, Phineas is all alone. So Isabella seizes the opportunity to have alone time with him. Yes, we are retreading similar story ideas, I grant, but I see this more as a follow-up to Happy Birthday Isabella than a direct ripoff. And I do think the story is rather cute. It's an innocent enough idea, and I really don't mind that there's no huge big idea until midway through the episode. The fact that they did that isn't bad, as the giant picnic does look nice, but I do like that they start off the plot and end the plot with a simple picnic, so Isabella gets her just rewards. And honestly, Phineas behaves exactly like I'd expect him to. He clearly doesn't mind spending quiet time with her, but he's also more than willing to jump back into action when Ferb returns. That honestly sounds about right, and I don't fault Phineas for that so much, but it does make the ending, when Isabella gets her way, all the more rewarding. I even like how in this episode Candace assists the Fireside Girls in arranging the picnic for the two of them. I really do wish they had done more with Candace being a Fireside Girl. I mean, they never actually had her quit. Did they? The Doof plot is alright. So his plan is to use his teleport Inator to transport Vanessa to a movie marathon, because apparently he's losing money because A, his ex-wife is on an eco-cultural exploration where she's literally throwing out money, which is the best joke of the whole plot, and B, he's been spending his money on his Inator, which he's now going to use. Yeah. Oh, and he was also going to use it on his brother to send him to Druselsteinoween or something. It's not really given much focus. This plot is alright. It's nothing special, but I do like some of the jokes they tell. One of the best ones being how he questions whether the last movie in the marathon is canon. After a lot of thought on this episode, I've decided to rate it 4 stars. I don't mind that the big idea doesn't come in until late in the episode, because it's clearly established that that's not the focus of the Phineas and Ferb plot. I can enjoy that plot for what it brings me, as well as the Doof plot, and I do think there are enough funny gags in both plots. It's an all-around really good episode, and I'm very glad I saw it. Episode 418, Terrifying Tri-State Trilogy of Terror. A mysterious bookmobile owner reads 3 different terrifying and strange tales. I really like this episode. It's a great one all around. On top of the 3 individual tales, we get a sort of 4th subplot revolving around this mysterious character only known as Mr. Macabre. He tells the stories from this bookmobile, and beyond that, these parts contribute some really great jokes. Like at the beginning, where a random bypasser mistakes it for a food truck, and when he gets corrected, he posts an angry review about it online. God, I hate millennials. At the end, it turns out that he doesn't actually own a bookmobile, but rather the entire episode was merely a pitch to this banker guy about his idea in order to get a loan for it. And the jokes they tell at the end are absolutely fantastic. So, how can I review an episode like this? An episode that tells 3 entirely different stories in 22 minutes with just this very vague wraparound surrounding the stories. Well, here's what I've decided. I'm going to review each of the 3 stories separately and give them their own rating. And then at the end, I'll look everything over and decide on an overall rating for the episode. Does that work for everybody? Well, too bad, I'm doing it anyway. So, let's get going. So the first story is Ducky Momo Turns Evil. Candace inadvertently brings her Ducky Momo plushie to life. This story is extremely simple. The plot is that Candace accidentally recites an incantation that supposedly turns any stuffed animal to life, and in the right circumstance, evil. And the rest of the episode is spent following this now live Ducky Momo plushie as it tracks Candace around the house. Until the end where, as it approaches Candace and fools us into thinking it's going to attack her, it instead goes for a hug. And then it turns out that it was actually Candace's other stuffed animal, Mr. Miggins, who was turned evil. So, yeah. For a 7-minute story, it's totally fine. I will admit I wasn't really that crazy about the twist ending, because in a weird way it inadvertently sucks all the tension out of the episode. Sure, it was a nice, intelligent twist, but once you know about it and you watch the episode again, all the tension is pretty much gone. But again, the story is totally fine, and the song is actually kind of catchy too. So, I'm going to give the story 3 stars. And that was story number 1. Strap in, folks, we still have 2 more. Story number 2. Night of the Giant Floating Baby Head. Doofenshmirtz encounters the Giant Floating Baby Head, a mythical creature that can grant cursed wishes. Wait a minute. Can it be? An episode of Phineas and Ferb that actually gives the Giant Floating Baby Head actual significance? That's not just a silly gag? Okay, in all seriousness, I really like this one. This one is good. In this story, Doofenshmirtz creates an Inator that's built specifically to draw out the giant baby head. And in this story, the baby head is a genie. Sort of. I'm not sure if there was an intentional callback to the Lake Nose Monster, but that's going to be my headcanon. So, Doof touches the baby head, and he is immediately granted 3 wishes, which is represented by the fact that 3 of his fingers turn into mini baby heads, which is so much funnier than it has any right to be. They tell all the usual jokes about genies, and they add their own unique spin, like how for his second wish he tries to wish to rule the tri-state area, but Perry drops a bookcase on his foot, and as a result he yells out, "Cheese and crackers!" And thus he becomes supreme leader of all things cheese and crackers. Which, my god, that was so funny. The final wish, though, is probably the funniest screw-up of all of them, for obvious reasons. And the episode basically just ends with Doof as a floating head, which is absolutely hilarious, made even funnier by the fact that Perry just up and leaves him like that, even giving him a smirk on the way out. I really love this story. It's just fantastic. The jokes are hilarious, and the plot is simple. I really love this one. It's just fantastic, and the jokes are hilarious. So, 5 stars. 2 stories down, 1 to go. And last, but certainly not least, Invasion of the Evil Platypus Clones. Phineas, Ferb, and friends confront a horde of evil platypus monsters. Basically, this story is just Phineas telling a story about a group of kids, themselves as stand-ins, who encounter an old legend involving grape juice and platypuses. Yeah, basically grape juice is the devil to them. You spill a little on even one of them and it turns purple. And evil. And then it starts spawning evil clones, which corner the kids, resulting in them finding Baljeet's life coach. Yeah, okay. Every single joke they tell with him hits bullseyes, by the way. This man inspires them to come up with a plan to wash the platypi of their grape juice stains in order to defeat them. I really liked the part where Phineas gives the gruesome ending to the episode, and then just changes it to the Hollywood ending because his friends complained. And of course, Alex Hirsch's cameo as Officer Concord, the Juice Time Juice Box flavor cop, was 31 flavors of funny. It quite literally comes out of nowhere. The story is fun, it's funny, it's engaging, it's surprisingly suspenseful. It's just a really great 7-minute story, and none of it feels forced. So, yeah, 5 stars for this one. That's all 3 stories in this 22-minute package. On the whole, yeah, this episode is really good. All 3 stories bring something really cool and engaging to the table. I laughed a lot, I felt scared for the characters at the right times, and overall, it really captures the spirit of Halloween. So based on the 3 stories and how they rated, this entire episode as a whole gets 4 stars. I do think the Candace story brings down the episode a touch, only because it is so basic and not quite as funny or scary as the other 2, but it was still a nice 7 minutes, and I don't regret watching it at all. And this is an episode I love to keep coming back to, even outside of Halloween. 419A, Druselsteinoween. With Phineas and Ferb's help, Vanessa hosts a big Halloween bash in Doofenshmirtz's newly inherited castle. Doofenshmirtz goes in search of hidden treasure. I actually liked this one a lot more than I expected to. For one, it's another one outside of summer, and the show does really great things outside of summer. I also really like the setting. The castle just gives off this really cool but menacing vibe that I can't seem to shake. Plus, the castle itself is just very visually interesting. So Doof inherits the castle from a family member that actually liked him more than his brother Roger, and my suspension of disbelief is already shattered. Okay, in all seriousness, apparently she gave him a treasure map with clues for him to use to find a secretly hidden treasure in this castle. There's some decent stuff in between with the clues, but to the episode's benefit, we get a chance to explore more of the castle, which I do like. But my favorite part is the end, where Doof actually finds the treasure, but then has a bunch of random local officials come in and demand payment on apparently unpaid fees from when the castle was relocated. He pretty much loses all of the fortune, and I feel awful for him, but I also found the entire thing to be completely hilarious. The other stuff is alright. There's not really a singular story going on, though. Rather, it's several littler stories. There's Vanessa, Candace, and Stacy coming to the party dressed in the exact same outfit. There's Monogram on the lookout for any trouble, including when he thinks it's his son hanging out with Vanessa, but then it turns out to be Stacy. There's Isabella trying to reenact the Cinderella bit with her glass slippers for Phineas, and then getting a nice barefoot dance with him at the end. And there's Ferb's solo performance. All these stories don't get a ton of attention or focus, which is a problem, but I don't think it's that bad here. It would be nice if we got a singular focus like in the Doof plot, but it sort of feels more like just a day in the life of these characters, which isn't bad. I do think it kind of works here. Helping is the fact that this episode doesn't feel cluttered with all these little stories going on, and each of them do get a good enough resolution. Plus, the pacing for this episode is just really good, and it all flows together very well. So, on the whole, this episode gets 4 stars. This one definitely surprised me. I did not like it so much when it first came out, but watching it again, it's a lot better than I ever gave it credit for. 419B. Face Your Fear. Doofenshmirtz's horror-themed plan backfires on him. Candace utilizes space technology to bust her brothers. Phineas and Ferb create a foam city. I find it a little strange that for the Doof plot, we're doing a story similar to the one in Cheers for Fears. In that episode, Doofenshmirtz had to face a fear of his that inexplicably came true. This time, it's a giant bat after his plan of enlarging small animals to make them scary backfires on him. It's not the exact same plot, but it's exploring similar themes, and unfortunately, I don't think they did enough to either differentiate this episode from that one, or make this one stand out in terms of comedy. I thought it was kind of funny when the giant bat grabbed Doof and put him in his mouth, but only kind of. The other 2 plots are just fine. Phineas and Ferb's stuff is exactly what you'd expect, although I did really like the ending where Phineas exclaims that the big idea is gone, Buford comments on it, and then Baljeet tells Buford that he says it like an angry old prospector. That made me laugh, and I don't know why. Funny enough, I actually thought the Candace plot was the funniest. She's at this space lab that Jeremy's father works at, and she gets the idea to use the equipment to catch the kids in the act using the technology so she can bust them to mom. It goes about as well as you think it does. But some of the jokes really are funny. For example, I love just how much Jeremy is so accepting of Candace's busting tendencies now. The show could have easily played it where he's constantly annoyed, but Stacy kind of already fills that role. I also like how it took Candace longer than usual to actually come up with the idea to use the equipment to bust the boys. So, yeah, I did get some good laughs out of this one. More than I expected. Unfortunately, I feel like, in terms of the episode as a whole, the Doof plot brings it down a little bit. But the other 2 plots are solid enough and funny enough. So, I'm going to give this episode 3 stars. Episode 420, The Klimpaloon Ultimatum. The kids and Candace go in search of the magical Klimpaloon. I'm gonna get this out of the way right now. The Doof plot is essentially irrelevant. It's boiled down to being mostly filler, with him wanting to transform his brother into a warthog, Perry accidentally being turned into a warthog, Doof having to wait for his brother to reappear on stage. It's all mostly nonsense, and honestly, I didn't find much of it to be funny. But it's offset by the fact that it barely gets that much screen time anyway. No, the majority of this episode is focused on the main plot, and honestly, it's really, really good. So first of all, the wraparound is Candace won a contest. Yes, the same contest from Just Our Luck, which is great continuity, by the way. She wins the contest to sing with Love Handle when they perform their song, The Ballad of Klimpaloon. Fun fact, this song was originally cut from the episode Summer Belongs to You. So the whole setup is she's singing with them as part of this award show in the category Fact-Based Songs. It's about as silly as you think. And then apparently the authenticity of the song comes into question because the authenticity of the Klimpaloon's existence comes into question. And so Phineas and Ferb and the group have to go out and prove that it's real within 24 hours or the band is disqualified. And all the while, everyone is basically locked in a soundproof room because they're not allowed to go out and improve it themselves. Yeah, so the beginning of this episode is, I'm not going to say it's stupid, but it feels like too much of a complicated setup for what ultimately amounts to them searching for this magical old-timey bathing suit that lives in the Himalayas. I understand why they set it up like that, because it ties into the main villain of the episode, but still, honestly, if this award show setup wasn't here, I'd still be just as invested in the adventure. In fact, halfway through, I forget about the setup entirely, only remembering when we cut back to the show for Doof's plot occasionally. This story is wonderful and the jokes are fantastic. And the songs in the episode are pretty darn good too. Oh, and Jon Stewart as the bad guy? Yeah, works perfectly. He comes off as this really charming character who can easily turn on the sinister and evil nature whenever he wants to. He's not only a great voice actor, but he's a pretty decent singer too. Honestly, my only complaint is that his character looks more like Stephen Colbert than Jon Stewart, and I don't exactly remember if that was supposed to be a joke or not. But like I said, the Doof plot, I'm sorry, but it's really stupid. And not in the sense that his plan itself is stupid, but more like this plot doesn't really amount to anything. A lot of it is just him derping around sort of waiting for things to happen. Oh, and did I mention that the warthog effect wears off at the end? So it really is kind of pointless anyway. Even Doof himself sort of acknowledges at the end that it's kind of pointless. It's a shame because this episode didn't even need the Doof plot. Yeah, if you had cut it out entirely and just kept it on the kids the entire time, this episode holds up just as well. And heck, why didn't they just make Doof the villain of their story? Yeah, why didn't they make him want to steal Klimpaloon? Maybe to power up an Inator or something. Sure, you'd have to retinker the story so the kids don't really interact with Doof, but then it would at least make his and Perry's involvement in the episode feel much less pointless. I don't know, it doesn't really matter because like I said, with or without the Doof plot, this episode is terrific. And thankfully, because it doesn't get as much focus, I can easily forgive it. On the whole, this episode gets 5 stars. I love the Phineas and Ferb plot so much, and the jokes are just so funny, that I can forgive the kind of irrelevance that the Doof plot gives off. And having Jon Stewart in your episode is always a plus. Episode 421A, Doof 101. Doofenshmirtz becomes a science teacher in lieu of jail time. This episode's context is very interesting to me. Firstly, it takes place during the school year. We've seen the show do episodes during Halloween and winter holidays, but never specifically during the school year. So already this episode has the making of something totally different. Does that mean it's a good episode? Well, not really. It's not a bad episode by any stretch, but firstly, I am a little disappointed that this is the only episode to take place during the school year, and it's contained to just 11 minutes. The premise is also a little weird. Doof takes a job as a high school science teacher for Vanessa's class because, in his own words, it was this or jail time. That's not the weird part. The weird part is that based on what we know from future episodes, mainly Last Day of Summer, Christmas Vacation, and the Alka Files, I'm not sure where in the timeline this fits. Spoilers, we know Doof decides to try going good in the finale, and the Alka Files is clearly designed to show him trying to be an agent. And we see in Christmas Vacation, he is clearly trying to commit an evil act. So how does this episode fit in? Is this science teacher gay just Doof's cover for being an agent? Was he fired from Alka and this is their way of not putting him in jail? I have no idea. He says in story that it was because his latest scheme put him in trouble with authorities, but for all we know, that could be a flat out lie. It's not important for this specific episode, but it's one of those things that I just can't stop thinking about when I'm analyzing this series. The episode itself is a mixed bag. First, the Doof plot. The plot is mostly Doof just trying to be a good teacher and winning Vanessa's respect in that regard. Until about halfway through when Vanessa's ex-boyfriend Johnny inexplicably gets mutated into this giant ape-human hybrid, and the rest of the plot is basically parodying King Kong. It's really nothing special, although I did like Johnny's reaction to Vanessa saving him and thinking they still had a chance. I love how he's just so totally not over her, despite his apparently unattentiveness being what drove her away. Oh, and Perry gets called in to help Doof for reasons. Now, apparently, this episode was written specifically to be a pilot for a potential spin-off. Now, while this plot is fine, I'm not really sure it would have worked as a full-fledged series, especially if episodes would have followed this formula. Doof teaches science, something goes horribly wrong, Perry gets called in, they fix it, end of story. Obviously, I have no way of knowing if that would have been the formula had the spin-off got picked up, but I really doubt they would have strayed too far from it anyway. Also, we have to consider the fact that Doofenshmirtz is a main character. He's not an occasional recurring character or a secondary character where giving him his own spin-off series to show off more parts of his personality or life would have made more sense. We already get that in the regular series. I don't hate this plot, and I don't dislike it because of this reason. It was kind of fun seeing Doof try to interact with the kids, although strangely no callback to sipping with the enemy, but it is sort of generic, and I don't really think it would have worked as a full-fledged series without tinkering. Unfortunately, that's not the episode's only problem. There are two subplots in this episode, and both of them kind of suck. The first is with these three bugs, Napoleon, Wendell, and Floyd. Their main shtick is just wanting to be noticed by humans. Their subplot really doesn't go anywhere, but I will admit, a couple of jokes and bits here or there made me laugh a little. It wasn't a total loss, but there was no connection to anything. It was just very random. Also, I don't know what confuses me more. The fact that they thought these bugs were funny enough to be brought back in the Alka Files, the fact that these bugs were in the original 1993 pitch for the show, or the fact that I don't think this is the dumbest plot of the episode. No, I'm serious when I say this. I think the other subplot is not only less funny, but it's more stupid. It revolves around the principal of the school, who has a grudge against Doofenshmirtz because he married Charlene, whom this character happens to be in love with. The problem is that his entire subplot is basically mimicking Candace's subplot. He waits for something to go wrong and tries to catch Doof in the act so he can fire him. It's particularly obnoxious here because of how blatant of a ripoff it is of that shtick. Not to mention that this character doesn't give me anything to make me want to like him. Once again, I have no idea if they would have kept this kind of plotline in the series had it been picked up, but I can only go off of this episode. Yeah. So, where does this episode stand as a whole? Well, the Doof plot was okay. There were some good moments and good jokes in it, but the other two plots don't bring much into the fray at all. Of the two subplots, I think the one with the three bugs sucks less, but even then, it wasn't that funny. So, after a lot of thought, I'm going to give this episode a very high 2 stars. I don't think this episode is bad. And there are some good ideas here, but it doesn't feel like something that was 100% fleshed out, especially when taken into context with other episodes in this show. The biggest problem with this episode is it is a backdoor pilot to a potential spin-off. You are basically trying to pitch the idea of this show to your audience using 11 minutes from this show. And unfortunately, you only get one chance to make a good first impression. 421B, Father's Day. Phineas and Ferb help Lawrence fulfill a lifelong dream for Father's Day. Doofenshmirtz tracks down an antique from his childhood days for his father. I really like this episode, both for its sentimental value and for its actual quality. First, the Phineas and Ferb stuff. This is just a sweet story about the boys helping their dad fulfill a lifelong dream, building a plane so he and Ferb's grandfather can fly it together. There's not much comedy here, but clearly they're not focused on it. They're focused on the emotions, and it really works here. There's something about watching the boys do nice things for other people around them that just really warms my heart and makes it worth coming back to episodes like this. And the song is pretty damn good too. The Doof plot is most of the same deal. Doof wants to find the infamous lawn gnome that was snatched from his family when he was a child and bring it to his father. But when he does, he accidentally breaks it and his father gets angry. And it's only after Doof leaves that his father realizes that it's the exact same lawn gnome he lost all those years ago. There's a fantastic scene that follows where Doof is sitting outside his old house and Perry comforts him. And I think it was really this scene right here when I realized just how great and smart this show really is. Most shows that use this concept, you know, a hero and a villain of sorts, really tend to degrade that relationship over the show's run. Like, they'll start off as adventurous, but over time it'll turn into utter disdain and disgust for the other's existence. That never happens with this show. In fact, they're more friends now than I think even Phineas and Ferb are with their friends. It's really something to watch this relationship bloom. Don't take that the wrong way. That scene was a really smart addition to this episode, because had it ended at just the scene with the father discovering the lawn gnome, I think it would have been a little bit of too sour a note to leave on, and we would have felt way too bad for Doofenshmirtz. But with it added in, it gives a very nice conclusion to this arc of his, and I tend to think of it more as an extension of that scene from Oil on Candace. I'm a little disappointed that the interaction was limited to just Doof's father, but I'm sure had they had more time, they would have done a lot more with the family. As it is, it's really sweet to see, and the entire episode just gives off such a beautiful vibe. It's definitely one of my favorites of Season 4, and it is so underappreciated. 5 stars. The positive vibe this show gives from episodes like this is one of the show's greatest strengths. 422A. Operation Crumbcake. Isabella writes, and quickly regrets, a love letter to Phineas. Doofenshmirtz plots to reverse his bad luck. So I've mentioned before that Season 4 has increased the focus on Isabella and Phineas' relationship, and this is another one of those episodes. And I love this story. To be honest, I'm surprised the show took this long to do it. It's so simple. Isabella writes a love letter to Phineas after she is inspired by a story her grandmother told her, except that after she realizes how that story ends, she quickly regrets it and enlists her troops' help to get it back before he reads it. I really like the part near the end where the girls are essentially acting as cops trying to intercept the letter from the post lady. That was definitely one of the best jokes of the episode. But then in the end, there's this really neat scene where it looks like she's actually going to fail and that Phineas is going to read the letter after all. And in a very rare moment of supreme maturity for her, she accepts this fate and lets it happen. She doesn't fight it any longer. She tells herself that whatever happens, everything will be okay, and she just watches it from the sideline. This was a really nice scene to see. I was very proud of her. It took a lot of courage and guts to actually accept this fate. And then Deus Ex Machina intervenes, undoes that moment, and so Phineas never actually reads the letter. What's even worse is that this character development, along with everything else we've learned up to this point, is really never addressed again. Which is a shame, because episodes like this, Happy Birthday Isabella, and Summer Belongs to You, really showcase significant growth for her character, at least in terms of her affection for him. But, of course, I will talk about that when I finally review Act Your Age. Also, I really just want to read the letter that Isabella actually wrote for him. Let me tell you, the nickname Crumbcake, I was on the floor laughing. And the girls teasing her for it was pretty cute. And the fact that Ferb also seems to know this makes it all the more hilarious. While also screwing up another episode in the future, but I'll get to that when I get to that. Unfortunately, the Doof plot is not as funny or as interesting. So this time around, he attributes his failures to Mercury being in retrograde. And so his Inator is designed to make things or people go backwards. Okay, full disclaimer, I'm not a scientist or an astrologist, but I don't get this logic. And in any case, I didn't find it to be funny. The funniest bits from this plot are the beginning where Monogram and Carl are debating the legitimacy of horoscopes, and the coin-operated self-destruct mechanism on his Inator was kind of funny. I chuckled. I think it was maybe an unintentional callback to Phineas' birthday cliporama, but I can't be sure. But sadly, the rest of the plot just doesn't have that much going for it. In the middle, Norm gets hit with the Inator and basically just goes backwards for half the story. All we see him do is dump a bunch of piñata pieces on the floor, put food back on dishes, which is gross, unmake coffee, and then unmake the trap Perry is in, which allows him to start the fight scene. Now that part could have been funny, but I felt that Doof's reaction to it wasn't giving me much to work with. This is one of the few times where I really felt like the Doof plot's only purpose was to act as the Deus Ex Machina of the episode. Yes, that's what pretty much every Doof plot does, but with most others, there's at least some really good or funny bits in the story where you just don't even notice the aspect of the episode until it comes up. Here, that's sadly not the case. Still, I think the Isabella stuff provides more than enough where I can justify giving this episode 4 stars. And seriously, I really want to read that letter. 422B. Mandis. Candace schemes to find out what makes boys tick. Doofenshmirtz inadvertently and accidentally transforms her appearance into that of a pizza delivery boy. I promise it flows much better than I just made it sound. Doof's scheme is to make himself look like the delivery boy of his new pizza place because he's unsatisfied with his pizzas constantly being delivered cold. While he's rambling, his Inator goes off and hits Candace, giving her the appearance of said delivery boy. While this is going on, she's trying to better understand boys because Jeremy gave her what she considers a confusing response to her invite to the movies. He says, "Cool." And this bothers her because she's Candace. That pretty much says it all. I have to say, I really enjoyed the scene where Candace is just conversing with the group of boys. Yeah, they do some stereotypical boy stuff you see in media, like burping and not wanting to talk about feelings. Whether or not this helps the episode objectively is certainly debatable, and I don't think I'm the right guy to ask there, but I enjoyed it because it all seemed in good spirit. The only disappointing thing is that this plot ends very abruptly. Like, literally in the last 10 seconds of the episode, she just gets transformed back to normal. Buford says one line, and the episode ends. It's extremely anticlimactic, and in a weird way, it almost makes the scene where she is conversing with the boys feel pointless. That said, I'm not going to hold it against the episode that much. I also find it weird that the kids don't interact with Candace as the pizza delivery guy until the episode is nearly over, which just adds to the anticlimactic feeling. Still, the plot was mostly solid, and there were some good jokes in. The Doof plot isn't quite as strong, but it's still decent enough. Firstly, it's a Doof versus pizza thing again, which we already saw in Sci-Fi Pie Fly. Now, while it's great that they directly mention that episode as the reason for Doof switching pizza places, the whole time I was watching, I was wondering how would this episode and that episode have turned out had the Doof plots been switched. Think about it. What if in Sci-Fi Pie Fly, Doof used this Inator to transform himself into the pizza delivery guy in order to sabotage his business and ruin his reputation? And in this episode, he used his dough-blow Inator to get back at this pizza place for all the cold pizzas. Maybe it's just me, but these plots being switched would just seem to make both episodes infinitely better. But that is just a random thought. I say this because here, this part of the plot really goes nowhere. Sure, the fight scene was cool, and we get a random Lulu Jones cameo, which is neat, but the actual scheme? It's really a non-factor. There's also a moment near the beginning where Doof is rambling, but it's not any kind of charming or funny rambling. It's just really obnoxious and kind of grating. This was the season where I really started to feel his voice became really hard to stomach. It's so different from seasons 1 and 2. And heck, even 3 was very tolerable. But this was the first episode where I really noticed that his voice had changed, and not for the better. The episode itself overall is not one of the best ones. It does have issues like the abrupt ending, the lacking Doof plot, and his annoying rambling. But overall, I think it's good. So, I'm going to give this episode 3 stars. Oh, and I didn't even mention Phineas and Ferb. Their big idea is making blueberry-flavored air. That's it. That's literally it. Episode 423, Tales from the Resistance. Back to the second dimension. A new threat emerges in the second dimension. So finally, at long last, we have the follow-up episode to the epic TV movie. It's about time, too. It shouldn't have taken this long after the movie came out for this to happen, but better late than never, I suppose. Does it live up to the high standards of the movie? Let's take a look. This time around, the second dimension is enjoying its freedom from Doofenshmirtz. The kids are learning how to be kids, and there's a sense of normalcy in Danville. Except for Candace, though, which is weird. But then, a new threat emerges after the kids are attacked. Doofenshmirtz is initially suspected, but it turns out that it's none other than Charlene, Doof's ex-wife, who is the mastermind behind it. Actually, I take that back. She's not his ex-wife. Yeah, through one of the most bizarre and outright hilarious twists the show has ever done, it turns out that Second Dimension Doofenshmirtz and Second Dimension Charlene are still married. Yeah, there's even a song and everything that accompanies this twist, and I'll be honest, it's one of the funniest songs of the show. By the end of the episode, Doof escapes with Charlene's help, and it's implied that he's about to go back into power, which means basically everything that was worked for in the movie is gone now, which really sucks. So with that out of the way, I have to say, I love this episode. Overall. I have some issues with it, though. The first is the fact that the ending pretty much retcons what the movie accomplished, which really does suck. But I honestly think the bigger disappointment is that it's Doofenshmirtz basically just retaking his position of power. By this I mean, how cool would it have been if Charlene had been the one to get full power instead of Doofenshmirtz? She's clearly shown to be more competent than Doofenshmirtz in this episode, and even more diabolical. So the fact that she's essentially stepping aside for Doofenshmirtz is kind of disappointing. And yeah, I guess it technically doesn't matter because the whole family is in power, but still. After the robot attacks, the schemes to turn the kids on one another, I would have really loved to see the episode end with Charlene in power. There's also the issue of Candace's character. So in the movie, she's very overprotective of her brothers, and that's understandable. By her own accord, she grew up very quickly in the second dimension so she could protect her brothers. It got to the point where she wouldn't even let them help out in the Resistance until they literally busted her out of prison and proved themselves. That was a really cool moment in the movie. Unfortunately, we're sort of back to the same shtick in this episode. She won't let them fight because she wants to protect them. There's a scene in the middle where Phineas and Candace get captured, and Ferb enters, and Candace thinks he's been transformed into a part Borg, working for evil, only for it to turn out that he was tricking them in order to help them escape. Now, this should have been an awesome scene because it shows that the boys are perfectly capable of handling themselves. But, 1. We've already seen this in the movie, and the novelty's kind of gone, and now Candace just looks kind of stupid. 2. Before that moment, she goes on this really long rant about what jail feels like, and it's actually kind of off-putting. I assume it's supposed to be funny, but it comes off as more eerie and frightening than funny, which is not necessarily a bad thing. I felt like this episode leaned more towards dramatic and dark than funny, but I did feel like occasionally the dark and dramatic sort of clashed with the funny. Even so, I think for the most part it was well balanced and well executed. I loved the fight scenes, I loved the songs, I loved the interactions between the characters, I really liked the twist, and actually I do really like the end scene. The one where Candace steps away from the resistance in order to lead a more relaxed life. And I think it's kind of fitting, although it would have been more fitting in the movie, to be honest. It's like a passing of the torch kind of feeling, while still setting the stage for a potential return in the future if they need her help. It's just a shame that this is the last we see of the second dimension in this series. But for a follow-up to the movie, it was great. It was fantastic. Aside from one or two things I didn't like, everything else was phenomenal and a worthy successor to the movie. So, this episode gets 5 stars. Those couple of weaker bits I mentioned earlier are what hold this episode back from 6 stars, but boy, it was a fun trip. Hopefully we do get more from the second dimension someday down the line. They have something really good on their plate here. Episode 424A, The Return of the Rogue Rabbit. Doofenshmirtz teams up with Dennis the Rabbit. Phineas and Ferb help the Fireside Girls create a spectacular marionette show. Right off the bat, I can say this episode is much better than No More Bunny Business. For one, Dennis the Rabbit actually feels somewhat threatening this time, not to mention that Doofenshmirtz's involvement doesn't feel completely pointless. Okay, yes, he is somewhat pushed into the background, but unlike in No More Bunny Business, it doesn't feel stupid. It at least feels like it has more of a purpose here, what with him building the supersuit Dennis uses to go after Perry. The stuff with Candace's interactions with the rabbit were actually really funny this time, much more than in the other episode, especially when she and the kids and Stacy encounter a disguised Monogram and Carl who come in at the end and take Dennis away with them. It wasn't nearly as obnoxious or annoying as the first episode. And as far as the Phineas and Ferb plot is concerned, I liked it. And that brief bizarro sequence involving the giant marionette puppet, yeah, that was definitely the coolest, weirdest, and funniest part of the entire episode. I suppose there's an argument to be made that both these plots really don't intertwine as well as they do in past episodes, but I don't really mind it that much. I enjoy both plots for what they are and for the jokes they provide. And like I've said, I do have a soft spot for episodes where Phineas and Ferb help their friends with their big ideas. I don't think this episode is a masterpiece by any stretch. The ending sequence I think drags on a bit too long, and some of the dialogue between Monogram and Carl honestly isn't even that funny, but it's a definite improvement over its predecessor. It's 1,000 times funnier and plenty more eventful. Final verdict? 4 stars. Also, I just love that quote over there. 424B, Live and Let Drive. Perry must take to the racetrack and beat Doofenshmirtz in the Grand Prix. This episode already has something working against it in that it's only 11 minutes long, like Road to Danville. Like with that episode, I think the shorter runtime hurt this episode a bit, but to this episode's credit, there is a bit of a stronger story going on here. Perry is tasked with stopping Doofenshmirtz from entering a race and winning because he plans to use the prize money for himself. Also, they bring up that he got a new swanky evil lair of sorts. The lair itself is gorgeous to look at. I thought they'd maybe do something where he wants the prize money to buy the place or upgrade the place, but no. They don't actually do that. If that was the intention, they really dropped the ball with the explanation. Doof plans to cheat, duh, and has created an Inator to make one of the better drivers just not give a shit, so Doof will win easily. It is a simple plot, but there is a little bit more going on here than in Road to Danville. Plus, I just think that this episode is funnier. It also cuts back occasionally to Linda, Lawrence, and even Candace watching the race from their couch, with Phineas and Ferb in the background doing their big idea. It's alright. Nothing about it is special, and honestly, if they weren't in the episode, I don't think my opinion would change one way or the other, though I did think it was kind of amusing to see Candace go from being indifferent to the race to absolutely loving it by the end. This episode is good. Nothing special about it, nothing that stands out, but also nothing bad in it either. So, I give it 3 stars. 425A, Lost in Danville. Doofenshmirtz is abducted by Peter the Panda's nemesis. A mysterious capsule ruins Phineas and Ferb's day. So, that twist ending. Let's talk about it. If you don't know, the twist is that at the end, it's revealed that this entire episode took place in an alternate universe. The Phineas and Ferb we see all episode long, and their portion talking to a polar bear who's acting as their father, I guess. While our Phineas and Ferb are looking on, just as confused as we are. I'm actually impressed at just how subtle they made this twist. If you watch closely throughout the episode, Phineas has one extra white stripe on his shirt, and it's only at the end, when Ferb points it out, that you even realize it. It kind of reminds me of conversations Dan and Swampy have had regarding a possible alternate ending to Across the Second Dimension. For those who don't know, an alternate ending was initially floated where we find out that the Phineas and Ferb we followed through all movie long are actually from an alternate dimension. Now, this ending never made it past the initial pitch phase because it was decided that doing this kind of ending in the movie would alienate too much of the fan base. Of course, that's kind of what they're doing with this ending, but I suppose it makes more sense to do it for an 11-minute episode because then it could be looked at as a one-off joke as opposed to a plot point in a big movie that could insult some fans. Unfortunately, that is the best part of the plot. The rest of the Phineas and Ferb plot is weird. So, this capsule thing falls into the backyard, and inside are two elderly people who try to warn them of grave danger, I guess? Honestly, not much of this plot is very funny, but it does get sort of interesting at the end where this black hole is unleashed from the capsule and nearly sucks everything and everyone in. And, to be fair, I like how this plot addresses their formula. Just as they're about to be sucked in, the kids talk about waiting for the big idea to disappear, as it always does, and surmise that the only way to save themselves is to get Candace to try to bust them. I thought that was really funny and really clever. Still, that's probably the second best part of this plot because I just end up not caring for so much of the rest of it. The two elderly characters, who, yes, are important to the other plot, are really obnoxious and annoying, and they just get on my nerves. The bit where the old man was claiming to be everyone from the future got old very fast. The woman offers nothing either. Thankfully, though, the Doof plot is a lot better. So, he's been captured by someone who we learn to be the nemesis of Peter the Panda, Professor Mystery. Lo and behold, his shtick is that everything about him is mysterious. He doesn't talk about what his evil plans are or what his evil inventions do. And apparently, Doofenshmirtz concludes that he and Peter had a falling out because of a lack of communication. It's hilarious because he's both 100% right and 100% wrong. A competent evil villain shouldn't just lay out their evil plans for the heroes so they can easily stop them, but for the purposes of the show, yes, the lack of communication kind of makes Mystery a dick in the eyes of Peter. The rest goes as you'd expect. Peter barges in, Mystery concedes and reveals his plan, and he's defeated. Then after that, we cut to a coffee shop where Mystery is telling Peter his entire backstory, which was actually a nice scene. Oh, but wait, then there's this. So, those elderly characters we were introduced to earlier in the episode, it turns out that they're Mystery's parents. Yeah. Now, I don't like these characters at all, but I thought this twist was just hilarious. It's easily the best part of the episode. Oh, the highlight. Yeah, you thought I meant the twist at the end of the episode. No, I'm talking about this twist. The twist to the end of the Doof plot. It's both incredibly hilarious, but also really satisfying in a way. It turns out that after the capsule from earlier disappeared, they were transported to this coffee shop where the three of them just reunite and reconnect. It was a really good scene to put into this episode. And I love how they managed to tie all of it together and make something really good out of elements I just didn't care for on their own. Also, I liked how this scene took place in Seattle. No real reason. So, yeah, the episode as a whole is a very mixed bag. The Phineas and Ferb plot is decent, but mostly when they don't give the two elderly characters any focus, although the action scene was pretty cool. The Doof plot is very enjoyable, with a very ironic subversion of the usual formula, and the two twists are pretty good. I usually think it's a bad idea when a show or movie does more than one twist ending, but this episode, to its credit, managed to pull it off. So after a lot of thought and a lot of rewatches, I'm giving this episode 3 stars. Yeah, as much as I enjoy several parts of this episode, I don't enjoy the entire thing. The elderly characters are super annoying, and the twist ending to the Phineas plot is amusing, but only at first. And for as much as I enjoyed the Doof plot, I honestly wished there was more involvement from Peter and Perry. We don't see them until basically the end, which is a shame because I thought there'd be more than one scene with Mystery and Peter together before the scene in the coffee shop. Still, I think overall, this is a good episode with great ideas in it. If maybe there was just another rewrite or so of the script, this episode could have been a lot better. 425B, the Inator method. Phineas and Ferb raise planets. Candace multitasks chores and an online game. Doofenshmirtz leads a motivational seminar. So this is the final 11-minute episode of the series in production order. And yeah, it's a fun episode. My favorite plot is actually Candace's plot. It was just so much fun watching her be a typical teenager. She's playing this online Ducky Momo game with Stacy, but also has to do a bunch of chores for Linda before she returns home. Her solution? Bring her game along for the ride. Because that can't possibly go wrong. It goes exactly as you'd expect. She screws up all the chores and doesn't even realize it until the end when she gets busted by Linda. It's all pretty funny, especially because of the comeuppance. The Phineas and Ferb stuff is really good too. They build a giant model solar system and have a race with all the planets. Yeah, it sounds stupid when you think about it, but they do throw in some good jokes. Irving as the announcer really works. I love the Uranus joke they throw in with Buford and Baljeet. That made me laugh a lot. And the banking joke at the end, I guess, is okay. Doof's plot is the weakest of the three, but it is still good. So Doof is giving his own seminar. Even more hilarious because he says he's doing it under a court order. Actually, now that I think about it, I wonder if this was the Inator mishap that forced him into his science teacher gig. Basically, his seminar is explaining what it's like to be evil. Sort of like how he was teaching his protege in Minor Monogram, while also having on standby an Inator that makes people obsessed with buying his merchandise. Admittedly, the story is a little bit scattered here, but I did find the parts with him blasting his customers with his Inators to be pretty funny. And I really liked the ending where after he's defeated, he's met with an angry mob that chases him into the streets. While I don't find the Doof plot to be quite as funny as the other two, it's still enjoyable, especially the song. So overall, we have two great plots and one good plot, with a lot of funny gags thrown in and an all-around good feel to the episode. So I'm going to give this episode 4 stars. It's a fun episode, and there isn't anything in here that I think is mildly bad. It's a pretty nice last 11-minute episode of the series. Oh boy. Episode 426, Act Your Age. 10 years in the future, Phineas wrestles with picking a college and discovering Isabella's crush on him. Doofenshmirtz gives himself a midlife crisis. There is no possible way I could tackle this episode without getting people from both sides jumping down my throat. Oh well. Jump away. I already did a written review of this episode like forever ago, so I'm used to it, and I came into this season fully expecting that this episode would be my most controversial review anyway. So, yeah. Let me get this out of the way right now. I don't really like this episode very much. I don't think this episode is very good. But I'm going to start the review by pointing out the positives of this episode. Because, yes, there are some things here that I do legitimately really like. For starters, I really like the Doof plot. Or at least, the idea of the Doof plot. Only Doofenshmirtz would be so pathetic that he has to give himself a midlife crisis. I really liked seeing the various crazy things he did while he was on his midlife crisis. Like riding a jet ski, dyeing his gray hair black, buying a really fast and dangerous car, and skydiving. I even love that they bring Perry along for this ride despite the fact that he's basically retired by this point in time. I even like the song that Doof sings about being in a midlife crisis. It's just so upbeat and funny that I can't help but laugh every time I hear it. I liked getting to see a glimpse of Candace and her future life. Apparently she grew up to become a lawyer that specializes in prosecuting people without evidence. Yeah, actually I wonder if this joke was just ahead of its time. And despite my reservations about this episode being essentially a time skip, I do like the character models they give for the kids. Phineas, Ferb, Isabella, Baljeet, Buford, even Irving, and especially the Fireside Girls. I like the way they all look, and they do look pretty much what I would expect for them to look like as teenagers. What makes it even better is the backstory behind this even happening. For those who don't know, Dan Povenmire himself recruited a very talented artist named Ashley Simpson from DeviantArt to make the character models for this episode after she gave him a drawing of her interpretation of them as teenagers at a Comic-Con. Despite anything that I may think about this episode as a whole, I love this story, and I wish the industry would do this kind of thing more often. You don't need to look far on the internet to see that there is some amazing talent there just waiting to be noticed and recognized. And we really need to do a better job of recognizing that talent. And it was all made great by the fact that she now has a job working on Milo Murphy's Law. That's just wonderful. One note I will make, though, is that I find it weird that Linda, Lawrence, Isabella's mother and grandmother, and Perry don't look a single day older in this episode. And honestly, Doofenshmirtz is kind of on the edge, too. He has gray hair, but it actually looks like it's more dyed gray hair than natural gray hair. It's weird like that. And unfortunately, that's where the positives about this episode end. Now it's time for the negatives, and strap in, I have a lot to say. The other two plots in this episode are Phineas discovering Isabella's crush on him while trying to decide what college to go to, and his and Isabella's friends teaming up to set them up together before she leaves for college. Does it all mesh well together? No, not really. First off, the episode begins with this weird live-action sequence starring Dan and Swampy reading fan mail. It's awkward, it's unrehearsed, and it's not really that funny. I think they were trying to emulate what Family Guy did with those viewer mail-style episodes, but it's not working here. Oh, and there's a live-action scene at the end of the episode, too, that consists of Swampy crying and Dan reacting awkwardly. Honestly, I don't even understand why these scenes are in the episode. They take up almost 2 minutes total of the episode's runtime, and there's not much of substance here. I know the first one is meant to introduce the episode, but it's only 22 minutes long, and with the things I've heard regarding this episode's production, from a horse's mouth, I must stress, you'd think they would have cut these scenes out entirely to give them more time to flesh out the story. Also, I love how the letter that springboards us into the episode reads, "Will we ever see Phineas and Ferb as teenagers?" when really the episode's focus is getting Isabella and Phineas together. It doesn't really focus on the fact that they're teenagers at all. Yeah, these live-action scenes didn't really need to be here. I wouldn't complain if they were funny, but I just don't think they're funny. And yeah, they really could have used those extra 2 minutes to really flesh out the story. I don't just mean, like, make the scenes better. I mean, there's a plot hole in this episode that really screws the episode over. It's established early on that Isabella is going to be leaving for college soon. Now that's all fine and good, but then there's a scene with Phineas and Isabella's grandmother where she reveals that she's not only leaving soon, but literally that day, right after her shift at her mother's Mexican restaurant ends. Now, this may be a very stupid question, but if you had thought the story out, you should be able to answer this. The question is, who else besides Phineas knows this fact? I mean, yes, Baljeet brings up the fact that she's leaving, but he never specifically states that she's leaving right away. It's never implied that anyone else knows this fact. So for all I know, the only one who might possibly know this fact is Phineas himself. I don't think that's what the writers were intending, but this part was so poorly written that that's how it comes off as. Now, if no one else was supposed to know, then maybe it would better explain why there was no real urgency on their part to put on a great moment for them and really rush it. It wouldn't excuse it, but it would make it more understandable. And yeah, that's another complaint I have about this episode. The voice acting in this episode is really not good. I don't exactly mean in the voices themselves. They're clearly trying to make the kids sound like teenagers, but in a weird way, it also sounds like everyone is phoning in their performance. None of the characters really emote the way you would expect them to emote in a situation. For example, the scene where Baljeet flat out tells Phineas Isabella has had a crush on him for years, he gives an awkward response. And again, after Buford explains that she's been coming over to their house for 11 summers, just to see what they were doing. You would think that in this scene there would be at least a little more emotion put into the voice acting, particularly on Phineas's part as he realizes what's going on. But there really is none of that. Hell, when Phineas questions Ferb on this, all he does is shrug. And then when Phineas leaves, Baljeet and Buford casually agree to try to hook him and Isabella up before she leaves for college. But neither of them actually sound like they want to do it. I don't really understand why. It's almost like every character's motivations are just because the plot demands it. Now, if that's supposed to be the joke, then you need to make it clear that that's what you're going for. But I never get the sense that that's what they're going for here. Oh, and do you want to know what Baljeet's excuse is when Phineas asks him why nobody ever told him this? He says, and I quote, "We're guys. We do not talk about feelings." What? That line was just so awkward, confusing, and insulting that I don't even know how to react to that. It's clearly supposed to be a joke, but it's not funny. And you would think that Baljeet would take the situation more seriously. I really don't understand what the writers were thinking in this situation. It's not much better on the side of the girls. First off, the focus of their endeavors is manipulating a situation. You know, stereotypical teenage girl stuff. I'll admit it was kind of sort of amusing, I guess, hearing the girls talk about boys and how they think they should be handled, but only a little bit. And again, there's really no motivation entailed as to why they're doing what they're doing. What's worse is that neither side is really called out for anything. Phineas never actually calls out the guys for not telling him or questioning them any further, and the girls are never called out for doing what they're doing for shallow reasons. Actually, I take that back. There's one line where they're called out, but it's very subtle. It's by Ferb, and all he says is, "You can't force these things." I've had some people theorize that maybe the intention behind all of this was to disprove the notion of cliches and how they work in this kind of plot. And if that was the intention, then this is just a case of botched execution in a really smart idea. The problem is, I never get the sense that that's what they're trying to go for. It's that one line, and it's never mentioned again by anybody. It's never even referenced, not even in passing. Which is why when ultimately their romantic dinner setup is vanished by Deus Ex Machina, and the girls don't really react other than just reminding themselves of the fact that it reminds them of their kid adventures, it just comes off as very shallow and insulting. Like, okay, this happened, it's not important, none of us need to be here. I don't know, I would have liked a little more disappointment on their end when this happened, or a little more acknowledgement that maybe, they done fucked up, but that never happens, and it does hurt the episode overall. There's two other very specific problems I want to point out, and they come near the end of the episode. So, the confession scene. I don't like it. For one, the same problems from before arise, in the lack of emotion emulated from the characters. When Isabella and Phineas are talking, it's just that one camera shot, no alterations, and there's never really any passion put into the words. They don't sound like they want to be there. I know they're trying to make the characters sound like teenagers, but at the same time, they just sound so unmotivated. I can't imagine that this was what they were intending in terms of emotional output. Isabella mentions that she gave up trying to pursue him in high school, and Phineas mentions that high school was around the time he was starting to get a thing for her. Do you want to know what we never see in this episode, not even once? That's right, we never see a scene of Phineas trying to flirt with Isabella in high school. Not one scene of that. You would think that to kind of drive the point home better, they would show a scene, even if it's just a fantasy scene, of Phineas trying to flirt with Isabella and her blowing him off or her not noticing or something. You would think they would have tried to add something like that into the episode, but no, there's nothing like that at all. We're just supposed to take their word for it. And that's another thing. The majority of the explanations we get, the very few explanations we get, it's all exposition. We're just supposed to take their word for it regarding events that happen, and we're shown very few clips. We get a couple of montages during the Isabella-Phineas duet, but they consist of Isabella walking into the backyard at various ages, and Isabella sitting behind Phineas while he's working on an invention at several ages. And that is literally it. They're mixed in with a couple of scenes from past episodes, but that's really it. So beyond the fact that I don't even buy Phineas's claim that he never had a thing for Isabella until high school, despite various episodes providing contradictory information, including an episode I haven't reviewed yet, the episode doesn't help itself because it doesn't show any of that stuff. It only shows maybe one or two clips, but nothing of importance. And because of that, I find myself not rooting for these two to get together. I find myself questioning why the hell Isabella turned around and came back to say goodbye to him. I find myself questioning why he's not emoting stronger. And really, what it comes down to is this one single question that the episode needs to ask itself. Why did they think they needed to age the characters up to tell this story? Everything I said in the beginning about me being fond of Ashley Simpson and her story behind getting to work on this episode and getting a job on Milo Murphy's Law, that all stands. I have no qualms against her. I have no qualms against the people who work behind this episode as people, but I am questioning the creative decisions they are making. Why did they think they needed to age them up? It doesn't make sense to me because, in my opinion, this episode's ultimate failure is that it doesn't celebrate the relationship it's trying to tie together. It's not celebrating Isabella and Phineas's relationship. Really, it feels like this episode's purpose is just to make them an official canon couple, rather than actually celebrating and showcasing their relationship over the series, which I thought this episode was going to do. I would rather have an episode that is a total love fest celebrating their friendship, their relationship, their bond, than an episode whose purpose is to just say, well, Now they're boyfriend and girlfriend. Here you go, fans. That's where I think this episode ultimately failed. I know a lot of people are going to disagree with me on this, but it's my opinion that you didn't need to age them up to give this arc a fitting conclusion. Now, I'm not advocating for 8-year-olds to start making out nonstop. That's disgusting. What I'm saying is, the entire series leading up to this point built the Isabella-Phineas relationship up on a really great foundation. Episodes like Summer Belongs to You, where Isabella goes through an arc, starting off frustrated that Phineas didn't pay attention to her in Paris, and then realizing just how important creating and inventing is to him, and that if he loses that, he loses part of his identity, and deciding that loving him for everything, including his obliviousness, is the best kind of love you can have. Episodes like Meepless in Seattle, where Phineas flat out admits he thinks she's cute. Now, his line is, "It's a scientific fact," but that's about as good an admission you're going to get from this version of Phineas, which she begrudgingly accepted. Then you have Happy Birthday Isabella, where he goes through a lot to throw her a great party. It's not exactly what she wants, true enough, but the effort is still there and she recognizes that effort. Plus, you have Operation Crumbcake, where she accepts when he's about to read the letter that everything will be okay in the end no matter what, and he looks like he's about to genuinely enjoy the letter. Plus, you have Night of the Living Pharmacists, which I haven't gotten to yet, where, I'm just going to say it, that episode should have been the conclusion to their arc. I'll get to why when I review that episode. But my point is, I felt like this episode failed because the series set up a great foundation for their relationship, a great foundation for them to work off of for resolution, and this episode just completely throws it in the shitter. It is blatantly ignored just to tell this cliche and not interesting story about them being teenagers and going off to college, where the characters don't even emote. Instead of this story being about Phineas's romantic interest in Isabella, why couldn't it have been a story about Phineas feeling guilty about hurting his best friend? That, I think, would have been a much more interesting story if they had not aged up the characters, and they made a story where Phineas finds out about her crush on him, he simply feels guilty about hurting her, and goes through endless loops to try and make it up to her. That is what I think would have made a more interesting, compelling, and wonderful story. And I'm both disappointed and confused as hell that we did not get that story. And it's not even that they just failed to tell their story, it's the fact that they only focused on them. They aged up every character, but they give the focus to Isabella and Phineas. I wonder if this episode was originally meant to be the series finale for the show, since 5 of the last 6 episodes in production order are the hour-long specials, and in some regards, this episode does have a series finale feel. If that was the case, I question why they didn't make it an hour-long episode. Then, you could have made it a curtain call special, where you focus on one character for a few minutes and you give them a proper ending, and we get to see where they end up. I'm starting to question if the 5-hour-long specials they were given after this episode were a compromise between Disney and the creative team, as opposed to having a new season, because this is all starting to make too much sense. This relationship is written so well, even with Phineas's obliviousness included, because you never get the sense that he doesn't care about her. He clearly has feelings for her and just doesn't understand it, and that's what I wish they would have focused on. This episode made Isabella and Phineas boyfriend and girlfriend. Great. It really didn't do much else, to be honest. And the picking the colleges thing, that was just a lazy wraparound. We don't really get to learn about the colleges very much. They're just used as a framing device to set up this story about Phineas deciding to go to school with Isabella to start a relationship with her. But if you literally take that out, the story is exactly the same. It's not really important. Now, after all of that, you're probably wondering if I hate this episode. And I don't. I don't hate this episode. I can't hate this episode. It's not a bad episode. It's a decent idea where they just badly dropped the ball. And it's a shame. Oh, and I guess I should mention, this episode canonizes Ferb and Vanessa. Okay, that's neat. The only thing that disappoints me is that we never find out what happens to Vanessa and Monty. I don't mean like in this episode, I mean like throughout the rest of the series. Nothing ever happens with them, they never break up, they don't have a conflict involving their ideologies or anything like that. It's just weird. Oh, and Ferbs. Yeah. So, after that incredibly long review and long rant, I'm finally ready to give a rating. And I'm going to give this episode a high 2 stars. There are things in this episode I really do like. I think it was a decent idea, and it's not a bad episode by any stretch. But the execution was poor, some of the writing, especially in the dialogue, was particularly awful, and that one plot hole really does screw this episode over. Still, I suppose it wouldn't be the worst idea if Alison Stoner's suggestion of a sequel episode ever came around. If for nothing else, just to see what they would do with Isabella and Phineas in a relationship. Although I do still stand by my statement. You did not need to age them up in order to give this arc a fitting conclusion. All you needed to do was tell a good story that celebrates their relationship. And unfortunately, in my opinion, this episode doesn't do that, which is why it fails on some level. 427 to 428. Phineas and Ferb save Summer. Doofenshmirtz's latest Inator puts Summer itself in jeopardy and puts Love Muffin in a position to strike. So 5 out of the final 6 episodes of the series in production order are hour-long episodes. The one exception is that musical countdown sequel that nobody really asked for. And I'll try to keep these last reviews as short as possible. These specials aired over the span of about 18 months after they announced that Season 4 would wind down with 5 hour-long episodes sprinkled over those 18 months. This was the first of those specials. And yeah, it's pretty good. It begins with both Love Muffin and Auka having to share a dinner hall for an awards ceremony and a graduation ceremony. And once they find this out, they start brawling with each other on the spot. Because, of course they do. And it really is just hilarious. That is, until Monogram's boss, Colonel Contraction, played by Jay Leno, comes in, sees the mess, and immediately fires him on the spot. Talk about a weird start. Later on, Perry and Doof's fight accidentally results in his Inator going off, resulting in the Earth moving away from the sun. Once the kids realize what's going on, they set off to investigate and figure out how to reverse it. While that's going on, Carl has been tapped to take over for Monogram, and he's proving to not be a great leader. What's even worse is that they start to get themselves captured by Love Muffin, who utilize Doofenshmirtz's not broken Inator to grow their power. Once they realize that Doof's Inator actually works, they decide to storm City Hall and make a bunch of demands, all of which are from Doof, until Rodney decides that they're stupid and ups the demands, and then reveals that he copied Doof's Inator and made it 10 times stronger, threatening to send the Earth into a new ice age. Yeesh, that's pretty out there for this show. Now this happens after the people of Danville storm City Hall themselves and angrily confront Mayor Roger when he suggests they just wear warmer clothes. And, I'm not even kidding, he spends the rest of the special stuck on the City Hall roof. They occasionally cut back to him and give off a funny one-liner, but that's pretty much his role the rest of the way. I really like that they decided to make Love Muffin more menacing and actually threatening in this episode. This is their most evil scheme yet, and on some level, they do succeed. They do bring the Earth to near freezing levels before they're ultimately stopped. And as a result, the stakes in this episode are pretty damn high. Higher than any episode we've had to date. You actually feel a little afraid of Love Muffin here. You actually feel like they might get away with it. Also, I love how the one demand the world leaders couldn't meet was the one revolving around pretzels. And apparently that's a deal breaker for Rodney. That whole bit was just hilarious. So on top of being really suspenseful and somewhat dramatic, there's a lot of great jokes in here too. As far as the music goes, the songs are great. They're just so lively and fun to listen to. Aside from the Doof plot and the Phineas and Ferb plot, we also have a subplot with Candace, as she finds a tape of herself she made as a child, listing off things she wanted to accomplish by the time she reached teenhood. And the one that immediately jumps out as important is overcoming her fear of spiders, which she still hasn't done. The others were inventing a new ice cream flavor, winning a spelling bee, and riding a unicorn. Outside of the joke where present Candace imitates young Candace's lisp unconsciously, it's not that funny. Honestly, the part where Stacy got bit by that spider and then was seen later extremely swollen was more creepy than it was funny. But I do like how they tie it all together at the end when Candace is tasked by Phineas to help them out with their plan to stop the Ice Age from coming. He sends her up to the attic to retrieve a box containing an important piece for their contraption, but the room is filled with spiders. And inside the box is a giant spider that she has to reach around in order to collect what she needs. This was a nice scene, and it did a great job of tying up loose ends while not doing it at the sake of the main story. And it was a great character building moment for Candace too. Of course, the kids succeed in setting things right, but not without some help from the other side too. See, Doof finds Monogram basically wallowing in self-pity. That scene was hilarious, by the way, and gives him a talking to and encourages him to get up and fight for his agency again. They team up, surprisingly, and everyone goes full throttle against Rodney and Love Muffin. They win, the Inator is dismantled, and everything goes back to normal. I even like how Monogram tries to thank Doof with a handshake, but then he pulls a too slow move on him in a pathetic but hilarious attempt to prove he's still evil. That was funny. And then we get a weird bit where Colonel Contraction comes in and praises Monogram on a job well done, but also says that because they lost the money from the graduation ceremony, they have to shut Auka down. And what follows is probably the dumbest joke of the entire episode. Carl immediately says they should rent out the original space, as it has now, quote-unquote, become available, as has the name Auka. And Monogram tops it off by firing Colonel Contraction, because that's totally how it works. Yeah, I really thought that joke was stupid. I think the reason is because it was way too rushed. The joke was like really fast, and then their plot just ends. So, yeah. But it's one small thing, and it doesn't hurt the episode as a whole. Oh, and there's another subplot involving Linda and Lawrence going spelunking or cave exploring. But their tour guide gets them lost in the cave until the end after the plots are resolved. The only memorable thing about this plot is Wallace Shawn as the tour guide. But beyond that, it's not that deep. But it's short and barely takes up a quarter of the episode's runtime. So as a whole, this hour-long episode is fantastic. It's definitely one of my favorites of the season. And it deserves 5 stars, easily. I remember when I first watched this special, I got really excited afterwards because I felt like this was just the beginning of the show taking itself to another level. Unfortunately, the show ended soon after, so that didn't happen. Which is a shame, but at least this tells me that it wanted to go out with a bang. Oh, and there's another very, very short subplot involving Irving. See, at the beginning, Phineas and Ferb and their friends are throwing this gigantic worldwide concert. When they get wind of the impending Ice Age, they enlist Irving to help them entertain the masses while they're gone. They occasionally cut back to him just doing his own thing, and I'll be completely honest, it's probably the stupidest subplot of the episode, but it is so funny. Jack McBrayer is a great voice actor, and I just love what he brought to Irving. 4:30 to 4:31. Night of the Living Pharmacists. A horde of Doofenshmirtz zombies run rampant on Danville. Before you ask, no, I did not skip any episodes. This is the next episode in production order. Yet for some reason, there are production codes missing in the series order. I don't know what this means. I don't know whether it means episodes were scrapped altogether, or maybe it was an error, but it only happens here with these hour-long specials, nowhere else in the series. Whatever, on to the episode. The plot is this. One of Doofenshmirtz's plans goes haywire. It's basically using his Repulsinator, which essentially has the same effect as the Ugly Inator from The Best Lazy Day Ever, to make Mayor Roger ugly. Okay, technically, it doesn't go haywire, it does technically work, but it does transform Roger into a Doofenshmirtz-esque zombie-like figure. And the joke with that was just fantastic. And now, every time he touches an innocent bystander, they too transform into a Doof-esque zombie. And so, pretty much, this episode becomes a Night of the Living Dead parody. Now, I've never seen the original movie, but this episode definitely makes me want to. Just like in Save Summer, Phineas and Ferb get wrapped into the story and find themselves on the defensive and having to find a way to reverse the effects. What I like with this episode is just how deep the interactions become between Phineas and Ferb's group and Doofenshmirtz's group. Sure, in Save Summer, they had to interfere with the Doof plan in order to save the Earth, but here, Phineas, Ferb, and Isabella actually interact directly with Doofenshmirtz and Vanessa. It's one thing that we've seen Candace interact more with Vanessa, but Phineas and Ferb rarely do, so this is a nice welcome change. It was really terrifying to see the stakes become as dire as they did as the episode went on. They really do a great job of conveying the emotion and the urgency of the situation through the characters. The best examples are in the middle when, after being separated from Isabella for a while, Phineas finally realizes it and starts running around in a panicked state. And yes, this is important, I'll come back to it later. And Doofenshmirtz's reaction near the end when Vanessa falls victim to the infestation. The voice acting in particular, in both these instances, is just great. You never for a moment doubt the emotion they showcase, or that the stakes are so high. It's a thrilling 44-minute experience, and there really aren't many breathers, especially in the final act. Another thing I also really like is the lengths this episode went to parody those zombie horror movies, all from the fear they create from the scenario all the way to the solution to defeating them. Since a power surge was the result of Doof's Inator going haywire, they conclude that using water on everyone that was infected will turn them back to normal. I don't quite get it either, but I'm not gonna even try to argue it. And so the last act is just them trying to build the contraption while avoiding getting touched by the Doof zombies. At the end, only Isabella and Phineas are left, and after a very dramatic and 100% earned scene, again, I'll get back to that, Isabella is the last one standing, and she manages to successfully get the machine working before she is transformed, thus turning everyone back to normal. At least in Danville. Yeah, the very end shows a sky view of Danville, and it reveals there's a giant wall around it, while the outside has a bunch of Doof zombies terrorizing the rest of the world. Now that was a real what the fuck ending. It freaked me out when it first aired, and it still freaks me out now. While this episode is clearly going for horror and drama, there are still some good jokes thrown in, such as Doof's increasing annoyance at his own zombie army, the Shaun of the Dead reunion joke, brief as it was, and I love how the episode just keeps cutting back to Stacy, of all people, who's watching a horror film and not even bothering to notice the Doof zombies behind her. I swear it's one of the best jokes in the entire special. I even love how they try to trick you at the end when a "The End" title card appears, but then it cuts back to Stacy watching the movies. But in case you were wondering if that was some sort of super meta joke, the answer is no. But it was still kind of funny. So with this great mix of great drama, amazing suspense, the right atmosphere, great voice acting and writing, and with just the right amount of comedy thrown in, you have one of the best episodes of the entire series. Bar none. It's just firing on all cylinders at pretty much every turn. That's why this episode is getting 6 stars. And you know what? I haven't even talked about the subplot yet. And yes, I waited until I gave the rating intentionally to talk about the subplot. That's because it's pretty much a giant elephant in the room. So the subplot revolves around Isabella trying to earn this patch called the Emotional Bravery Patch, which can only be earned by confessing one's affection to said target of affection. I immediately have what might be a stupid question, but why wasn't this made the end of Isabella and Phineas' arc? Or at least the beginning of the end of the arc. Seriously, it is literally perfect. Think about it, Isabella has a pathological fear of not earning every single patch as demonstrated in the episodes Where's Perry and B-Story, and this patch combines that with her desire/fear of confessing her feelings to Phineas. You would think that this would be a perfect wrap-up to their story, and even though it isn't, it still does them justice. We see, after a period of time where Phineas and Isabella had been separated, Phineas only then realizes she's not with the group, and he goes into a freaking frenzy, panicking out of his mind. And you'll notice that it's Isabella he's freaking out over. Not his mother, not his father, not even Candace, just Isabella. He even outright states that he would never forgive himself if he let something happen to her, thus setting up the stage for him sacrificing himself to the zombies just after Isabella managed to work up the courage to confess. That was one of the most heart-wrenching scenes of the episode, and the entire show to be perfectly honest, and it's handled perfectly. Of course, this is kind of ruined by the fact that at the end, they both lose their memories, so it's as if she never confessed, thus she fails to earn the patch. And even though it ends a tad abruptly cutting back to the overview of the town, you still really feel awful for her because she worked so hard to earn it and Phineas was genuinely going to reciprocate it. Yeah, I'm gonna say it. This episode did this entire arc and those two characters' relationship much more justice than Act Your Age did. The emotion was there, the voice acting was at its peak, the writing was great, the atmosphere was near perfect, the tension was so high. And as if that wasn't enough, according to storyboard artist Aliki Theopolopoulos, that scene was originally intended to have even more in it, including a kiss between the two of them. But unfortunately that was cut because, according to her, it was deemed a little too much. If you knew you were going to retcon it anyway, why not just leave it in? But that's a nitpick. I do mean it though when I say that I feel like this episode works way better as a closure, or at least the start of closure for their arc. It does everything perfectly that Act Your Age does not. I always thought after this episode aired that the Emotional Bravery patch would come back into play at some point in the future, because the episode does kind of leave off in sort of a cliffhanger fashion. Hell, there was an alternate ending where Phineas outright states he'll treasure the patch forever and then hugs her, implying that they're going to get together in some level. So the fact that it was retconned in favor of the Act Your Age episode does annoy me, but for what this episode gave me, for what this story gave me, it was great. I really felt the energy and the emotion from the characters. And I was invested in their story, hoping it would turn out well and that she would succeed. I know some people will disagree with me on that, and that's fine, but this is my opinion and I'm standing by it. The special as a whole is fantastic. Very few complaints, and it's a real Halloween classic. Hell, it's a series classic. I recommend it wholeheartedly. 433 to 434, Phineas and Ferb, Star Wars. The tale of A New Hope is retold, with Phineas and Ferb center stage. I have a confession to make. I have never been able to get fully immersed into Star Wars. Don't get me wrong, I've watched the original trilogy, and it's pretty good, and I've watched the prequel movies, and they're all terrible. It's just a franchise that never appealed to me. But like how Temple of Whatchadoon made me want to watch Indiana Jones films, this special makes me want to give Star Wars another shot. Truth be told, I was very skeptical of this special. Like, very skeptical. The only interaction with Star Wars parodies I had were the Robot Chicken and the Family Guy specials. And in Family Guy, they don't actually cross over. No, they just take the Family Guy characters and use them as stand-ins for the Star Wars characters. But no, this special is a fully fledged crossover. This was a huge risk to take. There was no guarantee that this was going to work. But you know what? This special proved me wrong. This is Star Wars, one of the most popular and iconic franchises of all time, and this special not only managed to do it justice, but it turned out to be one of the best episodes of the entire show. I sincerely mean that. The story is basically that Phineas and Ferb have inadvertently become the new holders of the Death Star plans, and they decide to go out and deliver to the rebellion. They meet up with some colorful characters, like Candace, Buford, and Baljeet, who are stormtroopers who were brainwashed into joining the Empire, and are stuck doing menial tasks for Vader, and Isabella, who is a skilled pilot with her own ship. While that's going on, Agent P, Perry the Rebel Puss in this universe, is tasked with finding the Death Star plans himself. He runs into this universe's Doofenshmirtz, named Darthenshmirtz, whom I will refer to as Doofenshmirtz for the sake of convenience. In this universe, Doofenshmirtz is a Darth Vader wannabe who claims the Death Star was actually his idea. Now, while I could have dealt with a little less of Doof and Perry, their parts are by no means bad. It really gets good in the second half when Doof introduces his Sith Inator, with the power to turn anyone into a Sith Lord. I think one of my favorite things about this special is the fact that it gives us things we've never seen before in an episode. Like, we get our first ever fight between Phineas and Ferb. Yeah, Doof's Sith Inator misfires and hits Ferb instead of Perry, turning him evil and forcing Phineas to do battle with him in order to get him back. We've never seen them even have so much as a spat with each other. The closest thing we got was the lemonade stand, but even then it was just a one-off gag. And I think my absolute favorite thing in this special is Isabella. In here, she's a pilot who holds a grudge against Han Solo, after he cut off her ship, preventing her from finishing the Kessel Run in 11 parsecs. Yeah, once again, I'm not too familiar with the Star Wars lore, so I'm just going to assume that that makes sense. What I love is what they did to her character here. In the canon, she's a sweet, gentle, kind spirit that rarely gets down, but also has this small dark streak in her. In this universe, she's stern, she's strict, she's snarky, very similar to Han Solo. She's not very interested in making friends or even tolerating anyone outside herself. It's very obvious early on, based on the way she scolds Phineas and Ferb when they're trying to modify her ship. I do like the arc they give her character, as we see her learn to accept the idea that friends are a good thing. There's a scene near the end when Phineas has to choose between completing the mission of getting the plans to the rebels, or going to find his missing brother. And he chooses his brother, and he asks Isabella to get the plans to the rebels. First off, at this point, he has really no reason to think Isabella is just going to do this because he asks her to. She's not really his friend, she's not really interested in being his friend, and she seems really annoyed and irritated by his presence, which actually makes his taking a liking to her in this universe all the funnier. But he still has enough faith in her to ask her this monumentally important task. I really love her line, "You're either really brave or really stupid." There's a scene afterwards where she rejects an offer to join the rebels, runs into Han Solo, and realizes she needs to rejoin her friends. That scene was honestly really satisfying. She's not a bad person by any means, but it's obvious she's let her grudge against Han affect her ability to open up. If I do have one complaint against her arc, it's that I feel as though her turn was a little bit too abrupt. When we see her leave the bar, she's still scowling, but when she's flying away with everyone rescued, she's kind of smiling. I think I would have liked it a little bit better if maybe they kept her scowling to her friends, but then when she's alone, she smiles. But that's a nitpick at best. It's still a very satisfying arc. Also, that kiss scene at the end between her and Phineas was hilarious. Heck, even Candace, Buford, and Baljeet get a bit of a mini arc for themselves, when they go through these menial tasks for Vader and constantly feel disrespected because they're not on the battlefield. But then there's a scene where Candace is about to fall to her death and Phineas up and rescues her. She rightfully points out that he had no obligation to save her, and yet he did it anyway. And that's the scene that makes her question whether she, Buford, and Baljeet are on the right side. Again, like the Isabella arc, I feel as though their turn was a tad too abrupt, but the setup is nice, and I can forgive the abrupt turn. This episode is honestly deeper than I think people give it credit for. The only legitimate disappointment about the special as a whole is the fact that it's the only Star Wars special for Phineas and Ferb. I mean, really, Robot Chicken and Family Guy got 3 specials apiece, so where's this show's other 2? Yes, I know this came when the show was already planned to be over, but the fact that it was so great makes it even more disappointing that there's only one of these specials. If you haven't already figured it out, I freaking love this episode, and it is a fantastic representation of just how great this show can really be, especially when it breaks its own formula. It is more than worthy of 6 stars. Like I said, it is a real shame that this is the only Phineas and Ferb Star Wars special we got, but you never know what the future can hold. Maybe they'll come back and do the other 2 movies in the original trilogy. Maybe they'll do the prequels. Maybe they'll do the sequel trilogy. You never really know. But if this is the only Phineas and Ferb Star Wars special we ever get, it is a damn great one to have. 4:36 to 4:37. Last day of summer. Candace's efforts to bust Phineas and Ferb put their literal existence in jeopardy. Doofenshmirtz questions his own evil nature. And so, we have come to the official series finale of Phineas and Ferb. After over 200 plus episodes, this was the one made to end it all. Relatively speaking, of course. I recall getting super emotional from the time the finale was announced to the time that it actually aired. When I first saw it, I thought it was such a perfect, can't-do-wrong ending to this great show, and I really didn't think it did anything wrong. Watching it now, well, I still think it's a really good special. I still really like the stories, and that last musical number will always make me choke up. But I can also say it's not perfect. So, the story is, Phineas and Ferb decide to go all out on their last day before school begins. While this is happening, Candace tries and fails to bust the boys again. That is until she runs into Doofenshmirtz and his do-over Inator. After futzing around with it, she and Doof become affected by it, and then she finds out that she's repeating the same day over and over again, much like the movie Groundhog Day. And she realizes she's the only one, besides Doof, that knows this. And the day continues to repeat itself as she continues to fail to bust the boys, and Doof continues to fail to trap Perry. As more and more loops happen, we notice that things that are commonplace, such as spoons and muffins and oranges, begin to disappear from existence completely due to rifts in the time-space continuum, meaning not only are there no physical objects, but no memories of said objects either. And unfortunately, Phineas and Ferb become victims of said rifts, meaning everyone except for Candace forgets that they even existed. She's somehow able to convince Isabella, Baljeet, and Buford to help her out, and they go into one of the rifts to retrieve the boys. During all of this, Doof is going through a sort of existential crisis. While he's trying to become Tri-Governor using his Tri-Governor Inator, we also come to learn that Vanessa has accepted a position in Auka's internship program, which conflicts with Doof's desire to move in with her into City Hall once he has fully taken over. Oh, by the way, that part where Doof relents that the reason he always failed was because there was no such position as ruler of the tri-state area is by far the funniest part in the entire episode. The funny thing here is that he actually does succeed in becoming Tri-Governor. To some extent. He even passes a law making it illegal for Auka and Perry to thwart him. They tried to make that moment seem somber, but honestly I thought it was funny. But in all seriousness, the scene that did get me was the scene later on where Vanessa outright states going to work at Auka is something she really wants to do, at which point Doof himself admits that he's not actually happy ruling over the tri-state area. I wasn't expecting this. So, kudos to this episode for putting it in. And of course, shortly after this, both plots come together as the kids and Candace try to get Phineas and Ferb out of the void and to destroy their contraption before the space-time continuum completely collapses. And Doof, Perry, and Vanessa try to do the same with his do-over Inator. Some people I know have issues with how this was presented, in that Doof was led to believe he did succeed, only for it to be noticed that his device wasn't even plugged in, but I personally don't think it's that big of a deal. I get the idea behind it, and personally I was more interested in the fact that this was sort of a setup to the premise of Alka-Files. Those last 5 minutes are just perfect. There is really no proper way I could describe them and do the scene justice. On a sentimental level, I love this special. On a critical level, I really like this special. The biggest criticism lobbied against this is that it doesn't feel like a series finale. It feels more just like a regular Phineas and Ferb special. On some level, I can understand where this is coming from. The buildup of this special is that it's the last day of summer vacation before the kids go back to school. But honestly, if you take the brief moments where school is even mentioned out of the special, that context doesn't even resonate with the special, for the most part. It does mostly just feel like an ordinary special. Now that's not necessarily a bad thing, because this show can do really good specials. But yeah, in some ways, it doesn't really feel like the show wrapped up like a traditional finale usually does. Even the last song sort of paints it like it's not really meant to be the end, just a break, if you will. It doesn't necessarily hurt the episode in my eyes, but I do find myself having to remind myself that it is the finale, because it doesn't feel like a finale. Another issue I do have is that the special in some places feels slow and padded with filler, especially in the middle with Doof's parts when he becomes Tri-Governor. Not much really does happen beyond Doof telling Perry he's no longer allowed to thwart him. Most of the action is in the Phineas and Ferb plot, mostly when they're riding the big awesome ride that's meant to serve as a love letter to the fans, and when they're in the void trying to survive. But even then, I have to admit the action in this episode is not the best. Honestly, after you get a giant Ice Age threat in Save Summer, the threat in this episode feels more mundane. On a metaphorical level, it feels bigger, but in terms of in-context presentation, yeah, it can feel a little more mundane compared to Save Summer. There's also that one minor nitpick that we never get to see Vanessa actually interning in the Alka-Files, which I don't understand at all. All of that said, they're not issues that ruin the episode in any way. We still get a lot of great things from this special. The love letter at the beginning to fans, Doof actually winning for once, the time in the void, the ending musical number, and so much more. So even with those minor issues, this was still a really great special, and it was a nice love letter to the fans, basically thanking them for supporting the show over the years. And that's what this special's primary goal was, to be a thank you letter to the fans for supporting them. And in that context, this special succeeded with flying colors. So with all of the good things that came from this special, even coupled with the minor negative things I mentioned, this special is still fantastic, and it's for those reasons that I'm going to give it 5 stars. And it's really ironic that the plot hinges around people forgetting about Phineas and Ferb, when I'm fairly certain that after the run this show has had, nobody is going to forget the impact that those boys have had on us and the animation industry for a long, long time. This show has meant a great deal to many people, myself included. And though it is sad that it's over, it certainly had an unforgettable run. And it got to do one thing that most shows never get to do, and that's go out on its own terms. When you look at shows like SpongeBob, Family Guy, The Simpsons, shows that have been on for so long that people are just sick of it, and the shows have clearly lost their old charm, to see a show like this that had a significantly long run, but still got to go out on its own terms while it was still very loved and respected, is an impressive accomplishment. I salute Dan and Swampy for making the decision to end the show on their terms before it got stale and hated, even though I personally am sad that it's over. But wait, we still have 2 more episodes in the show left to go. Episode 440, Phineas and Ferb Musical Cliptastic Countdown, hosted by Kelly Osbourne. Kelly Osbourne hosts a countdown of the top 10 songs from seasons 2 and 3. Monogram and Doofenshmirtz plot to regain their starring role. Once again, I'm not going to critique the actual song list because that's way too subjective. Instead, I'm just going to talk about the story surrounding Kelly, Doof, and Monogram. And guess what? There isn't one! It's basically just Doof and Monogram derping around, annoyed that Osbourne got the hosting gig instead of them. And so they try to claim it back for themselves. That's really it. There's nothing here. With the first one, there was at least an interesting story woven around the countdown, with Doof trying to use music to hypnotize the audience. Plus, Monogram and Doof really worked well off of each other when it was just them and occasionally Perry. But Kelly Osbourne doesn't bring much to this episode that Doof and Monogram couldn't. And that's not necessarily her fault. I have nothing against her as an actress, and I'm sure she's a perfectly fine person, and I don't have anything against the Osborns at all, but there is nothing in this script to help her. There's also the problem that Doof and Monogram are animated while Kelly is live action. Why? Why not just do everyone animated? I've heard that they used Adobe Flash to animate this episode, and yeah, it really shows. The animation in this episode is awful. But at least if Kelly had been animated, it would have been consistent. This is just too jarring. Also odd is that for this special, they mashed seasons 2 and 3 together rather than just do them separately. Another decision that I don't understand at all. Also, there was a random Maya Mitchell cameo for some reason. Actually, since this episode came around the time Teen Beach Movie came out, I'm left to assume that this episode was made mostly to get a cameo from her, just so they could cross-promote that movie, which is really sad. The first musical countdown episode had good animation, a good atmosphere, and an interesting story woven in between the countdown. Plus, it was actually funny. But this one has none of that. It's cheap, it's lazy, it's not engaging, and I don't even bother coming back to this one. Despite the fact that I enjoy the musical numbers from seasons 2 and 3 more than season 1 on the whole, I prefer the first musical countdown episode because it was at least an interesting and funny story. This is just next to nothing. This episode is terrible. It gets 1 star. And come on, admit it, I know you were all expecting me to give this rating to Act Your Age. But at least to that episode's credit, that was a decent idea that they just botched. This is not only a bad idea, but it's executed even worse. The only remotely entertaining thing in this episode is a scene in the middle where Doof and Monogram are dressed up like Kelly Osbourne and they start voguing? I still don't know what that is. It's funny more in terms of being so bizarre and strange that I can't help but laugh, but it's a really sad indicator that that's my favorite part of the episode. And I'll be honest, it was the one thing that saved this episode from getting 0 stars. I'm not kidding. I have nothing against either Kelly or Maya as actresses or people, but they really didn't need to be in this episode. They really didn't. And there was no excuse for this episode to have been animated in Adobe Flash. It just screams laziness. It's one thing to have used it for the Take Two with Phineas and Ferb spin-off series, where episodes are only 2 to 3 minutes in length, but this was a 22-minute episode. There is no excuse, especially when this is the only episode to have done it. Also, why is the production code of this episode so high when it aired so early in Season 4's run? I have never been able to understand that. Not at all. And finally, 441 to 442, The Auka Files. Perry leads a team of trainees, including Doofenshmirtz, to save Auka from a new threat. So this is the official last episode of the series. It aired several months after the finale and acted as a pilot to a potential spin-off that never got picked up. And I can see why. I remember loving the special when it came out as a nostalgia trip down memory lane. We were all still mourning the end of the show, and I saw this as one more chance to see many of the characters I grew to love so much. Critically, though, it's not as good. The story revolves around Perry having to be a leader to a team of rookie trainees, and Doof, as they navigate both training sessions and a new threat that emerges from Monogram's past. Sounds like an interesting story with chances of comedy, but it's not really. First of all, the team of trainees. Maggie the macaw, Harry the hyena, and Karen the cat. They're not only very inept, but they're not really funny either. The incompetence is understandable. They're new, they don't understand the ropes yet. That's why they're here to be trained. But after a while, they got on my nerves a bit. Another problem is that of this group, the only one that can actually speak coherent English is Doofenshmirtz, so naturally he's going to get the majority of the lines. I'm usually all for Doofenshmirtz and his comedy, but in this episode he was kind of annoying. I didn't find many of his lines to be funny, and the ones I did find funny weren't that funny. Also, his voice is really off in this episode, and it's especially noticeable in the songs. Season 4 was the season where Doof's voice got very hard to stomach, and this episode is the worst offender. The idea seems to be that Perry has to learn how to be a true leader while his trainees learn how to be good agents, all while they try to save Auka from being overrun by a threat. But that all doesn't really resonate very well. We don't get much in terms of Perry trying to be a better leader. Most of it is just the trainees screwing up and Perry being annoyed by them. But there's no sense of progress or progression with these characters. We don't really see the agents improving, even marginally. They just keep messing up at the same level as always. This episode also unfortunately falls into the trap of struggles to convey the correct emotion for the situation. For example, there's a scene where Doof sets off a bunch of missiles that land on the Flynn Fletcher home and completely destroy it. Perry's pretty distraught about it, but Doof? Not so much. Or at least it's not conveyed very well at all. Sure, he talks about feeling bad about it and expressing optimism that it'll be fixed, but I don't hear it in his voice. I'm not convinced he feels bad about it. This was apparently supposed to be the point that gave Perry his chip on the shoulder against Doof, and understandably. But that also fails because it's not conveyed that Perry is especially angry at Doof. He's just annoyed at his antics, but not angry at the fact that his freaking house exploded. This is one of the show's very few flaws, and it's only occasionally bad at it. But when it fails, oh boy does it fail. And the biggest failure comes at the end, where after they get stranded on an island, Perry flies away on his jetpack, leaving the trainees to fend for themselves. Now, a regular viewer would take this as the moment where Perry decides to give up on his team, leaving them to step up on their own. But this episode, for whatever bizarre reason, decided that we were stupid for thinking that, and instead, they did this. After Perry leaves and Doof sings a very poorly sung song about teamwork, the trainees go to the scene of their first training exercise for the climax of the episode. Now, I will admit I did enjoy the climax the most of this episode, because it was very action-oriented and well choreographed, but that's all fucked up when it's revealed that Perry didn't leave in a hissy fit. No, instead, he left to get a head start on the climax and simply left a note in the Auka manual telling them where to meet him. Yeah, I wish I was kidding. Even when I first watched this special, I was utterly dumbfounded by this scene. I was really expecting this to be the moment where Perry realizes he needs to actually trust his team and let them figure things out on their own, and for the agents to realize they need to take being an agent more seriously. But no, the episode doesn't go down that route. Why? I have no idea. It makes literally no sense to me, and it makes me feel like there wasn't supposed to be any sort of character arcs of any kind in this special. But that's exactly the setup we get. And by the end, it doesn't feel like they've come a long way at all. Perry doesn't seem like a better leader, and the agents don't really seem like they're much better. Sure, teamwork helps, but if you're incompetent as individuals, teamwork can only help you so much. It just baffles me how badly they botched this kind of story. And as far as the main villain is concerned, he's not very memorable. The only standout thing about him besides being a bug is that he's voiced by Paul Reubens, aka Pee Wee Herman. That's cool, I guess. But it's depressing that that's his most memorable attribute. He doesn't have that much involvement, and he's not that funny. His plan really isn't even that engaging. It just amounts to using his mind control on the agents to overrun Auka. The first subplot isn't all that interesting either. It's mainly Carl and Monogram trying to figure out what's going on when they realize all of their agents have become brainwashed by fleas to do the villain's bidding. That's it. They get a couple of funny lines here and there, but it's not very interesting. Also, why is Carl even here? The finale specifically says that Carl went back to college. He should not be here. Hell, Vanessa should have been here. She said she was going to start interning at Auka. Are you telling me you couldn't even work that into the special, even if it was just a cameo? It's just so baffling. Hell, why isn't Stacy in this episode? She knows about Perry's secret, and you would think this would be the episode they would work that into the story. But nope. Also, there's a second subplot. This one involves the three bugs we saw from Doof 101. Once again, they have absolutely no reason to be here. I'm sorry, they're not as funny as in Doof 101, plus they serve no purpose to the main plot. It's one thing when it's just an 11-minute episode, but this one is 44, and their parts are just filler. It wouldn't be so bad if their shtick wasn't exactly the same as in that episode, or if they were just a little funnier in this episode, but they're not. They literally have no purpose. I thought maybe they'd get tangled with the villain, like they'd turn evil and join his side, or they would get tricked into helping the villain and then set out to right their wrongs. But none of that happens. And in the end, they just get squashed and their fate remains unknown. And that's really it. They could have, and arguably should have been cut from this episode. Yeah, so this episode follows the act your age model of being a decent idea that really fails in execution. So, unfortunately, as much as I nostalgically enjoyed the special, critically, it's not a very good one, and I have to penalize it for it. So, this episode gets 2 stars. I appreciate the fact that the crew thought Doof going good was a concept worth exploring further. I'm not going to say it was wasted on 11 minutes in Agent Doof, because, for one, in that episode, it was clear we were not supposed to take it seriously. But in this episode, we are. We're supposed to take it more seriously, and we're supposed to see this group as a cohesive team that knows what they're doing by the end, and it just never really feels that way. This is not a bad idea for an episode. Heck, it's not even a bad idea for a spin-off. But what they had here didn't really work as well as it could have. It's a shame, too, when you consider the mountains of ideas writer Josh Pruitt talked about on his Twitter feed following this episode's premiere. So it's not a lack of ideas or innovation that doomed this episode, it was just a lack of execution. It is kind of disappointing that this was the last episode to have aired, and that the Outcast spin-off did not get picked up, because this idea could have worked with some major tinkering. But it is a shame that this was the last one to air, and that the show technically did get a disappointing send-off. It's a disappointing end to a really great show. And even then, it's disappointing by this show's standards. And that's it. That is all 224 episodes of Phineas and Ferb reviewed. Wow. We did it. We got through every episode. I feel weird. Okay, so for the final time, let's look at the chart. Season 4 had 1 bad episode, 7 meh episodes, 11 good episodes, 20 great episodes, 7 amazing episodes, and 3 classics. That's a pretty good spread, and keep in mind, there were fewer episodes in Season 4 than in Seasons 2 and 3. But, overall, there was a jump in quality from Season 3 to Season 4. Not a drastic one, but one that's noticeable enough. Season 4 earned 205 stars out of a possible 294 stars, averaging out to just over 4 stars per episode, which means that I can safely and happily declare Season 4 to be a great season. It most definitely deserves this honor. Season 4 stepped up its game big time. While it didn't do everything perfectly, it's rare to see a show step up its game this much in its final season, so it's really great to see. The only downside is that, yes, this was the last season of the show, which really sucks. And now it's time for some Season 4 notes. There's so much about this season that I could talk about that I don't really know where to start. So, number 1, 6 of the show's 7-hour-long specials came in this season. I don't think it actually means anything in the grand scheme of things. I just think it's funny that Season 2 had the show's first hour-long special, and then we didn't get another one until Season 4, and then we got 6 of them. That's just very funny. And speaking of this, I actually recall an interview that came out just before the finale aired, where Dan and Swampy talked about how after the initial 4-season order was completed, Disney ordered more hour-long specials because they thought they were getting more bang for their buck. Seeing as 5 of the last 6 episodes in production order are the hour-longs, the 6th being a musical countdown episode for some bizarre reason, this makes sense. And I suppose it would make sense that Dan would think that Disney wouldn't want to go back to doing just a regular series anymore after the hour-longs were done. So I can understand the logic of Dan and Swampy wanting to give the show a proper finale before things spiraled out of control. I think I'm more surprised at the fact that Disney allowed them to do it. When Steven Hillenburg apparently wanted to end SpongeBob after its 3rd season and the first theatrical film, Nickelodeon wanted to keep it going, and after Hillenburg left, they just kept the show in production. And the rest is history. I can only imagine that if Milo Murphy's Law was not picked up by Disney for a series run, that something like this would have happened to Phineas and Ferb too. And while I am disappointed that the show is not doing new episodes anymore, I certainly would not want the show to go down the path of SpongeBob. Number 2, the show is great at not caving to using stereotypical emotions. To a fault. Okay, let me explain this one. In the episode Act Your Age, the point was to convey enough emotion to make the viewer want to root for Isabella and Phineas to get together, and for them to think that it's a good thing. My problems, as I detailed in the review, is that I never felt that the characters within the episode actually cared about the outcome. Sure, they say things that make it seem like they do, but I don't buy the emotions. It's a failing of both the writing and the voice acting. The episode doesn't use cliches like crying or even angry confrontation over kept secrets or that kind of stuff, and while that's technically in line with the show's atmosphere, it kind of gives off the impression that the episode is just going through the motions. It's sort of the same problem with the Outca Files, where you think the story is going to go in one direction that requires invoking an emotion, but then it never actually does that. I was waiting for Perry's anger, stemming from Doof inadvertently blowing up his host family's house, to come back and be thrown back at Doof, for him to really wake up and do better, but that never came. Similarly, I was waiting for Perry's breaking point over his team's incompetence to come back and motivate them to do better and prove him wrong, and maybe make him realize that he himself needs to do better as a leader. but that doesn't happen either. Both of these things, you could argue, are cliche, and the show obviously tries hard to avoid being cliche. But at the same time, you're not always going to be able to avoid them. If you're avoiding them just for the sake of avoiding them, there's a chance you could come out with something really incoherent or messy, or something that just lacks any real direction or impact. And that's what I felt happened to those 2 episodes in particular. They tried to avoid being cliche and using those tropes or emotions, but in exchange, they failed to provide anything of substance in its place that could work within the context of the story. I don't want to say that the show can't do emotional stuff really well, because that's not true either. The show has done very powerful emotional moments in the past, like in Summer Belongs to You, where Candace has that moment with Jeremy on the bridge, or at the end when they kiss, or when they're coming home and she finally caves into the believe mantra. Or on the island, when Phineas finally breaks down and thinks there's no way to get off the island as he's about to lose the bet with Buford and everything he's ever stood for, and Isabella realizes the broken down Phineas in front of her isn't the one she loves or wants. How about the movie, and all of Phineas's moments questioning Perry's loyalty to their family after they discover his secret, only to realize that he was the more loyal one all along when they find out the consequences of the secret coming out. Or what about, dude, we're getting the band back together? That end scene at the concert where Linda and Lawrence celebrate their anniversary while Love Handle is playing and Candace and Phineas embrace while they're watching it, I think that's one of the coolest scenes they've had between them. And that's only a few examples I could think of off the top of my head. So, yeah, the show has proven in the past it can handle emotional scenes very well and convey the correct emotions in the right context. But when it fails, man, it is spectacular in its failing. Number 3. The voices in Season 4 are definitely different from Season 3, Season 2, and especially Season 1. If you watch a Season 1 episode and a Season 4 episode back to back, the difference is so jarring. Now, most voices that aged over the show's run were for the better, like Phineas, Ferb's, Isabella's. I know some people don't actually like Isabella's voice and that it got higher, but I enjoy it. Mainly the only voices that I couldn't really get on board with was Doofenshmirtz's and sort of Buford. But more Doofenshmirtz's. It got really gravelly, and it's especially noticeable in the Auka files. I think it's more the strain of doing such a voice consistently for so long, rather than a conscious effort on Dan's part to make the voice more like that. But yeah, it's very noticeable, and at times it was very hard to stomach. Number 4. Though the show did end, it ended with a good foundation set up for potentially more material to work with if they ever decided to do more with this franchise. Here's what I mean. Think about where we left off. In Season 4 alone, we see Stacy discovering Perry's secret double life and not getting mind-wiped. We see Love Muffin essentially be disbanded and defeated, which already sets up a good revenge story. We see Doof convert legitimately to the good side. We even see our favorite characters as teenagers, and there's at least potential there for another story in the future. And perhaps we could get a second Dimension follow-up episode. Plus that third Meep episode that never got made. There's a lot that was set up for in Season 4 that could be used for material if the show ever returned, or they just decided to do different things with this franchise, like a sequel series or a one-off special. This goes back sort of to Last Day of Summer, where the criticisms there are that it doesn't really feel like a wrap-up or a true finale. I do believe in part that this was intentional, with the creators having openly stated publicly that they haven't closed the door on doing more with these characters and this show. I suppose it makes some sense to leave some things at least a little open-ended, so you have something to work off of if there's ever like a reunion special or a new series or something like that. Number 5. There's one quality that this show permeates that I think goes really under the radar, and that is respect. And I don't exactly mean like the characters all have a great respect for each other and treat each other well. Although, yes, that is also very applicable here. What I'm talking about is respect for its audience and respect for the medium. Phineas and Ferb is a show that refuses to talk down to its audience and refuses to treat them like idiots. It gives them intelligent humor, intelligent characters, intelligent stories, and an overall positive vibe to the universe they've created. When I see a show like Teen Titans Go that seemingly thrives off of universal disrespect for its audience, its medium, and, in that show's case, its original source material, it makes me all the more grateful that a show like this exists. A show that basically says, no, our viewers are smarter, our viewers deserve better. Not only that, but it also has respect for its fellow animated shows. Like with Mission Marvel, Dan once said publicly that while in production, the writers involved got into a debate over how they could utilize Thor's hammer with the Phineas and Ferb characters. There was apparently some pushback from the Marvel writers as, quote, the hammer is not about who has Thor's power, but rather who is worthy, and only Thor is worthy. And rather than do something that might disrespect the character, they just up and threw that specific conversation into the episode. Not only was that a funny exchange, but it also showed that the Phineas and Ferb people have no intention of throwing shade or insulting its fellow animated shows. Same thing with the Star Wars crossover. That could have easily been a phoned-in parody like with Family Guy or Robot Chicken. But no, they took it dead serious. They crafted a well-told story around the events of the movie, keeping true to the spirit of Star Wars while also throwing in the Phineas and Ferb touch. And it turned out to be one of the best episodes of the entire show. Number 6. How did it take this season 3 years to complete its run? No, seriously, this season took the longest of any of the 4 seasons to finish its run. And you have to consider the fact that Season 2 has 65 episodes and Season 3 has 63 episodes, and yet they aired faster. I don't really know. Was Disney trying to stretch it out as long as possible in the slim hope that Dan and Swampy would decide they want to keep going? Were they waiting for them to pitch them a show that they liked enough to pick up? I'm not entirely sure. And that kind of brings me to my next question. Number 7. Why was the show's regular scheduled run moved from Disney Channel to Disney XD? Now, Phineas and Ferb wasn't the only show to have this happen to them, but it's very confusing. It happened around the summer of 2014, where Disney XD promoted its summer of premieres for all of its animated shows. Now, this wasn't necessarily a new thing. They did something similar in 2012. But unlike then, when the premieres returned to Disney Channel after the summer, this time they kept the change. Disney Channel essentially became the home of tween girl sitcoms, which are mostly bland and terrible, while Disney XD became the home of most of Disney's animated shows, coupled with a few live-action shows. When I was younger, I thought that the move was in part to blame for the show's declining ratings and eventual end. While that's very likely not the case, the timing is definitely suspicious. Disney Channel seemed to abandon animation that wasn't aimed at preschoolers, with only occasional, and I use that term loosely, reruns of some of their cartoons dedicated to certain weeks. But beyond that, their focus is live-action sitcoms. Aside from 1 or 2 occasionally decent ones, most of the live-action on Disney Channel is generic, bland, and just not very good. Why did Disney Channel shift away from children's animation? I have no idea. In fact, they're only now starting to bring it back, with a series based off the 2010 film Tangled coming out in 2017. But just that show? Really? I don't get it. And finally, number 8. I always hear that shows like Adventure Time and Regular Show are responsible for what became the animation renaissance of the 2010s, where the quality of the shows drastically went up. I don't agree. I believe it was Phineas and Ferb that got that ball rolling. It may not be as good as Regular Show or Adventure Time, but it is good in its own right, and it showed that children's cartoons could not only be profitable, but they could also be good, too. You could actually try and tell a good story or great comedy without compromising your product. The show wasn't groundbreaking by any means, but this was a great show that won a lot of people over and kept children's animation going for a while before the boom came along. And even after things started to improve, this show didn't rest on its laurels. It upped its game too, especially in Season 4. And for that, it deserves a lot more respect than I think it gets. And while I am disappointed that the show is over, it did have a great run. It had a ton of episodes and a ton of praise and admiration, and it put children's animation in a good place to improve. Because of this, we have much better material now than we've had in quite some time. The people behind this show did such a great job with it, giving us these memorable characters, memorable stories, and a memorable experience that probably did a lot of us good that we may never be able to articulate. It does suck that it's over, especially since Disney is still keeping reruns going. But I am glad that Dan and Swampy, as well as most of the crew, got to move to a new show, Milo Murphy's Law, so they're sticking around for quite a while. And like they said, if you like Phineas, you'll like Milo too. And of course, they've left the door open to possibly do more with them in the future. So, you never really know. We may still yet see these characters again going forward. Wouldn't it be awesome if we could get a Milo and Phineas crossover? And even if we don't, I'm still extremely grateful to have found this show and to have been able to love this show with everyone else. My nostalgia for this show made me want to keep talking about it. So it inspired me essentially to make this video series, look over the show, and just talk about it more. And I am very glad that I did. It was not easy, but I'm very glad that I went through with this project. Now, as far as what I'm going to do with videos in the future, I really don't know. This was the passion project that I was working on for several months, and now that it's over, I don't really know where to go. I suppose I could do top 10 lists of my favorite, least favorite episodes by season, least favorite songs by season. I don't know. I've also considered doing theory videos, further looking into certain aspects of the show that either I love, I hate, or I just have questions about. I really don't know. I'll just see where everything takes me. But for now, thank you all for tuning in, watching these videos, and basking in the Phineas and Ferb nostalgia with me. Feel free to leave a comment, feel free to agree or disagree with my opinions, but most importantly, feel free to celebrate this show. Feel free to share it with your friends. It doesn't matter that they're not doing new episodes anymore. This show is still great, it's still beloved, and it's still getting new attention even to this day. So go ahead, celebrate it all you want. You deserve it. Until next time. So go ahead, celebrate it all you want. You deserve it.